The stagecoach lurched to a stop, dust settling like a shroud over Eleanor Hayes's dreams. She clutched the address in trembling fingers, a ranch that no longer existed, a man who never was. Behind her corset, $20,000 in banknotes pressed against her ribs, a fortune her father's partner would kill to claim. Before her stood a one-armed blacksmith amid charred timber, his eyes holding secrets as dark as the ash beneath his boots. She'd traveled 2,000 miles to marry a ghost. Now survival meant trusting a stranger. Stay with me until the end of this journey, and comment which city you're watching from. I want to see how far Eleanor's story travels across this world. The Montana Territory stretched endlessly in all directions, a vast canvas of golden prairie grass and distant purple mountains that seemed to mock Eleanor Hayes with their indifferent beauty. She pressed her gloved hand against the stagecoach window, watching the landscape roll past in waves of late summer heat. 3 weeks of travel, from Boston by rail to Cheyenne, then by stagecoach through Wyoming and into Montana, and every mile had carried her farther from everything she'd known and closer to a future she'd built entirely in her imagination. The other passengers had disembarked at various stops along the route. Now, only Eleanor remained, sharing the coach with a traveling salesman who'd spent the last 50 miles snoring against the opposite window, his sample case clutched protectively to his chest even in sleep. Eleanor envied him that unconscious ease. She hadn't slept properly in days, her mind too full of questions and hopes and the persistent, nagging worry that perhaps she'd made a terrible mistake. But no. She touched the packet of letters tucked into her reticule, reassuring herself with their physical presence. Thomas Brennan's words had been so earnest, so full of promise. He'd written of his ranch in the Montana Territory, of the cabin he'd built with his own hands, of the life they would share together. His letters had painted pictures of sunrises over rolling hills, of cattle grazing in green valleys, of a simple but honest life far from the suffocating expectations of Boston society. Eleanor had needed those pictures more than Thomas Brennan could have known. She'd needed them when her father died suddenly of a heart attack, leaving her alone at 23 with a modest inheritance and no male relative to protect her interests. She'd needed them when Victor Langley, her father's business partner, had begun making his intentions clear, intentions that had nothing to do with her happiness and everything to do with gaining control of her inheritance. Victor was 47 years old, with cold eyes and a smile that never reached them. He'd started visiting the Hayes household more frequently after her father's funeral, always bringing flowers, always staying just long enough to make his presence felt, but not so long as to be improper. Eleanor's aunt, who'd come to stay as her chaperone, had encouraged the match with an enthusiasm that made Eleanor's skin crawl. "Mr. Langley is a successful man, Eleanor," her aunt had said repeatedly. "Your father trusted him in business. You could do far worse." But Eleanor had seen how Victor looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching. She'd heard the edge in his voice when he'd asked about her father's will, about the terms of her inheritance. She knew, with a certainty that lived in her bones, that Victor Langley saw her not as a woman, but as a commodity, a means to an end. So when she'd seen the advertisement in the matrimonial newspaper, "Rancher in Montana Territory seeks educated woman of good character for marriage, must be willing to embrace frontier life," Eleanor had responded with a desperation she was only now beginning to fully understand. She'd corresponded with Thomas Brennan for 3 months, his letters growing warmer and more personal with each exchange. He'd never sent a photograph, explaining that he had none to send, but his words had painted a picture of a man who was honest, hardworking, and lonely in the way that made sense to Eleanor's own lonely heart. When he'd proposed marriage by letter, Eleanor had accepted with barely a moment's hesitation. She'd used a portion of her inheritance to book her passage west, telling her aunt and Victor that she was visiting a school friend in Philadelphia. By the time they discovered the truth, she would be married to Thomas Brennan, her inheritance legally transferred to her husband's protection, far beyond Victor Langley's grasping reach. Except now, as the stagecoach began to slow, as the buildings of Copper Falls came into view through the dust-streaked window, Eleanor felt the first cold fingers of doubt wrap around her heart. The driver's voice called out from above, "Copper Falls, last stop, Copper Falls!" Eleanor gathered her things with shaking hands, her carpet bag, her small trunk that the driver would unload, her reticule containing Thomas's letters, and the carefully folded bank drafts that represented her entire fortune. She'd sewn additional notes into the lining of her corset and the hem of her traveling dress, terrified of losing everything to thieves or accident. The weight of the hidden money pressed against her with every breath, a constant reminder of what she carried and what she risked. The salesman woke with a snort as the coach stopped. He tipped his hat to Eleanor, grabbed his sample case, and was gone before she could return the gesture. Then she was alone, and the driver was opening the door, offering his hand to help her down. Eleanor stepped into the street of Copper Falls, Montana territory, and felt her carefully constructed dreams begin to crumble. It was a rough frontier town, smaller than she'd imagined, consisting of perhaps 24 buildings lining a single main street. The Lucky Dollar Saloon dominated one corner, its painted sign faded and peeling. Across from it stood a general store, a boarding house with a sagging porch, and what appeared to be a land office. Horses tied to hitching posts swished their tails at flies. A few men in dusty work clothes stood in the shade of the saloon's overhang, watching the stagecoach with idle curiosity. "Ma'am." The driver had unloaded her trunk and was looking at her expectantly.
"Someone meeting you?" "Yes," Eleanor said, trying to sound more certain than she felt. "Mr. Thomas Brennan. He has a ranch near here." The driver's expression changed. Not much, just a slight narrowing of his eyes, a flicker of something that might have been confusion or concern. "Thomas Brennan, you say?" "Yes, he was supposed to meet me here." Eleanor looked up and down the street, searching for a man who matched the description from the letters, tall with dark hair and broad shoulders, probably wearing a rancher's practical clothes. "Wait here," the driver said. He left her trunk in the street and walked toward the saloon, disappearing inside. Eleanor stood alone beside her luggage, feeling the eyes of the town upon her. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly. Sweat trickled down her spine beneath her proper Boston traveling dress, which was entirely unsuited to Montana heat. Minutes passed. A woman emerged from the general store, glanced at Eleanor, then quickly looked away and hurried down the street. Two children ran past, shouting and laughing, their bare feet kicking up dust. A wagon rattled by, the driver touching his hat brim in greeting but not stopping. Finally, the stagecoach driver emerged from the saloon, accompanied by a gray-haired man wearing a sheriff's star pinned to his leather vest. They walked toward Eleanor with expressions that made her stomach tighten with dread. "Miss," the sheriff said, removing his hat, "I'm Sheriff Tom Dougherty. The driver here says you're looking for Thomas Brennan." "Yes. He's my fiancé. We've been corresponding, and he asked me to come west to marry him. He was supposed to meet me here today." Eleanor heard the defensiveness in her own voice, the edge of desperation she couldn't quite hide. The sheriff and the driver exchanged glances. The sheriff cleared his throat. "Miss, I don't know how to tell you this gently, so I'll just say it plain. There's no Thomas Brennan in Copper Falls. Never has been, far as I know." The words hit Eleanor like a physical blow. "That's impossible. I have his letters. He wrote to me for months. He described his ranch, his life here. Can I see those letters, miss?" With trembling hands, Eleanor retrieved the packet from her reticule and handed them to the sheriff. He unfolded several, reading quickly, his frown deepening with each page. "The handwriting looks familiar," he muttered. "Jenkins, doesn't this look like—" He stopped himself, glancing at Eleanor's pale face. "Miss, why don't you come with me to my office? You look like you could use a chair and some water." "I don't need water. I need answers." But even as she spoke, Eleanor felt her knees weaken. The world seemed to tilt slightly, the heat and exhaustion and crushing disappointment combining to make her dizzy. "Driver, could you bring the lady's trunk?" The sheriff took Eleanor's elbow gently but firmly, guiding her toward a small building with "Sheriff" painted on a sign above the door. She let herself be led, too shocked to resist, her mind still insisting that there must be some mistake, some explanation. The sheriff's office was dim and relatively cool after the harsh sunlight. He settled Eleanor into a wooden chair and poured water from a pitcher into a tin cup. "Drink," he commanded, and she obeyed mechanically. The driver set her trunk inside the door and departed, touching his hat brim in sympathy. The sheriff sat on the edge of his desk, still holding the letters, his expression troubled. "Miss, I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this, but you've been the victim of a cruel deception.
These letters describe the old Brennan Ranch, that much is true. But William Brennan died 3 months ago of pneumonia, and he was 70 years old. Never had a son named Thomas.
Eleanor set down the water cup carefully, afraid she might drop it. I don't understand. The ranch itself is about 8 miles northeast of here, up in the foothills. But here's the thing, it burned down last spring, lightning strike. The house, the barn, most of the outbuildings, all gone. There's nothing left but a small cabin and a lot of charred timber. But the letters, they're dated through last month. He described the ranch as if Eleanor's voice caught. She pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting tears. She would not cry in front of this stranger. She would not give whoever had done this to her the satisfaction of her public tears. The sheriff sighed heavily. Miss, I've seen this kind of thing before. Not often, but it happens. Some men think it's funny, corresponding with women back east, getting them to come out here under false pretenses. Others are running outright swindles, trying to get money out of desperate women. I never sent him money, Eleanor said quickly. He never asked for any. That's something, at least. The sheriff studied her face. You have family back east? Someone I can wire to come get you, or at least send you funds for the return journey? Eleanor thought of Victor Langley, who by now had certainly discovered her deception. She thought of her aunt, who would say, I told you so, with every breath. She thought of returning to Boston in disgrace, unmarried and foolish, her inheritance vulnerable to Victor's machinations and society's judgment. No, she said firmly. No family. Friends, then? No. Eleanor straightened in her chair, feeling her spine stiffen with resolve. She hadn't come 2,000 miles to turn around and slink back in defeat. She had money, more than the sheriff suspected, and she had determination. Sheriff Doherty, I'd like to hire a horse and a guide. I want to see this ranch. The sheriff blinked. The burned ranch? Miss, there's nothing to see, but I want to see it anyway. Eleanor stood, and though she swayed slightly, she kept her voice steady. Someone went to great trouble to lure me here with descriptions of that property. I want to understand why, and I want to see the land that was described in those letters. Miss Hayes, begging your pardon, but you're a lady from back east. You can't just ride out into the territory alone. It's not safe. And besides, then I'll hire someone to take me. Surely there's someone in this town who would accept payment to guide me 8 miles to see a piece of property. The sheriff rubbed his jaw, clearly weighing his options. Eleanor could see the calculations in his eyes, his responsibility for her safety, his understanding that she was a grown woman capable of making her own decisions, his probable desire to simply have this problem remove itself from his office. The only person out at the old Brennan place is Samuel Reed, he said finally. He's staying in the cabin, keeping squatters off the land until the estate's settled. But, Miss Hayes, can you direct me to someone who will take me to him? I could ride out with you myself, I suppose, but not until tomorrow morning. I've got a prisoner I'm transporting to Helena this afternoon. Then tell me how to get there, and I'll go myself. You can't ride out alone. It's 8 miles of rough country, and you don't know the way. You'd be lost before you got 2 miles out of town. Eleanor felt frustration rising in her throat like bile. She'd been so careful, so thorough in her planning. She'd checked the matrimonial newspaper's reputation, verified that they screened their advertisers. She'd kept copies of all correspondence. She'd told herself that Thomas Brennan's reluctance to send a photograph was simply frontier modesty, that his descriptions of his life were too detailed to be fabrication. She'd been a fool, but she wasn't beaten. Not yet. Then what do you suggest, Sheriff? I can't return to Boston. I won't. And I refuse to simply accept that I've been brought here for no purpose. The sheriff studied her for a long moment, and Eleanor saw something shift in his expression. A grudging respect, perhaps, or recognition of a stubbornness that matched his own. The livery stable is run by Tom Peterson. Tell him I sent you. He might be willing to rent you a horse and buggy for a day or two, and he could probably be persuaded to drive you out to the Brennan place himself if you pay him fair. But Miss Hayes, I want you to understand something. What? Samuel Reed is not the kind of man you're probably used to dealing with. He's a veteran of the war between the states, lost his arm at Shiloh. He came out here looking for peace and quiet, and he's not inclined to be sociable. He's a good man, honest as they come.
but he's rough around the edges, and he's not going to appreciate having a lady from Boston show up expecting him to solve her problems. I don't expect anyone to solve my problems, Eleanor said sharply. I expect to solve them myself. But first, I need to see this land. I need to understand what I'm dealing with. The sheriff nodded slowly. Fair enough. Peterson's stable is 3 buildings down on this side of the street. You tell him what you need and mention my name. He'll see you right. Eleanor retrieved her reticule and moved toward the door, then paused. Sheriff Doherty? The handwriting in those letters? You said it looked familiar. The sheriff's expression closed off. I could be wrong. But you don't think you are. Miss Hayes, if I'm right about who wrote those letters, it's a matter I'll need to investigate carefully. I can't go making accusations without proof, but I promise you if someone in this town perpetrated a fraud on you, I'll see justice done. It wasn't the answer Eleanor wanted, but it was more than she'd expected. She nodded once, sharply, and left the sheriff's office, stepping back into the harsh sunlight of the Montana afternoon. The livery stable smelled of hay and horses and leather. Tom Peterson turned out to be a barrel-chested man with kind eyes and hands scarred from years of work. He listened to Eleanor's request without judgment, quoted her a fair price for a buggy rental and his services as a driver, and didn't ask unnecessary questions. We can leave within the hour, he said. But ma'am, I should warn you, the Brennan place isn't fit for much anymore. Just burned timber in that little cabin. Samuel Reed keeps to himself out there. Don't expect a warm welcome. I don't expect anything, Eleanor said, which was becoming truer by the moment. All her expectations had already been crushed. What remained was simply the stubborn need to see this through to some kind of conclusion. An hour later, she sat beside Tom Peterson on the bench of a sturdy buggy, her trunk secured in the back, as they left Copper Falls behind. The road, such as it was, wound northeast through golden prairie grass that rippled like water in the afternoon breeze. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still touched with snow despite the late summer heat. It was beautiful country. Eleanor couldn't deny that. Under different circumstances, she might have found it breathtaking, but now the vast emptiness felt less like freedom and more like exposure. She was so far from everything familiar, so far from any life she'd known. What had she done? You all right, ma'am? Peterson asked, glancing at her with concern. Yes. Just tired from the journey. It's a hard thing, what happened to you. Sheriff Dougherty told me a bit while you were gathering your things. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Thank you. Eleanor appreciated that he didn't offer false reassurances or suggest that everything would work out fine. At this moment, honest sympathy was more valuable than empty optimism. They rode in companionable silence for a while. The sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Hawks circled overhead. Once, Peterson pointed out a small herd of antelope in the distance, their white rumps flashing as they bounded away. That's the Brennan property line, Peterson said eventually, gesturing toward a weathered fence post. Or what's left of it. Old William let the fences go these last few years, didn't have the strength to maintain them properly, and he was too proud to ask for help. As they crested a low hill, Eleanor saw the ruins spread before them. Peterson hadn't exaggerated. The ranch was devastated. The main house was nothing but a stone chimney standing sentinel over a field of charred timber and collapsed beams. The barn was similarly destroyed, though Eleanor could make out the skeleton of its frame against the darkening sky. Outbuildings were reduced to ash and scattered debris. But there, set back from the ruins, stood a small cabin, rough-hewn logs with a stone chimney, smoke rising lazily from the flue. A lean-to sheltered a horse and what appeared to be blacksmithing equipment. Behind the cabin, a small vegetable garden had been recently tended, the soil dark and rich. That's Samuel's place, Peterson said. He built that forge himself after he arrived. Does blacksmith work for folks around here, enough to get by? Shoes, horses, men's tools, that kind of thing. As the buggy approached, a man emerged from the cabin. Even from a distance, Eleanor could see he was tall, over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and a bearing that spoke of military discipline despite his rough clothes. As they drew closer, she saw that his left sleeve was pinned up at the elbow, the arm simply gone. His face was weathered and hard, with eyes the color of storm clouds and a jaw dark with several days' stubble. He watched them approach with the wariness of a man who'd learned not to trust unexpected visitors. Peterson brought the buggy to a stop 20 feet from the cabin. "Afternoon, Samuel. Got someone here who wants to meet you." The man, Samuel Reed, looked at Eleanor with an expression that was not quite suspicion, but certainly not welcome. "Ma'am." Eleanor climbed down from the buggy before Peterson could offer assistance, determined not to appear helpless. She walked toward Samuel Reed with her head high, even though her legs trembled with exhaustion and her heart hammered with anxiety about what she was doing. "Mr. Reed, my name is Eleanor Hayes. I've just arrived from Boston under the impression that I was coming to marry a man named Thomas Brennan, who owned this ranch. I've since learned that no such person exists and that the ranch burned down months ago. Sheriff Doherty suggested that you might be able to tell me more about the property." Samuel Reed studied her for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then he turned his gaze to Peterson. "Tom, what's going on here?" "Just what the lady said, Samuel. Someone's been writing her letters pretending to be William Brennan's son, lured her all the way out here from Boston. She wanted to see the place with her own eyes." Samuel's jaw tightened. He looked back at Eleanor, and she saw something flicker in his eyes, anger perhaps, though she didn't think it was directed at her. There was no son. William Brennan never married, and this ranch belongs to the estate now, such as it is. I'm just staying here, keeping watch until it's sold or settled." "I understand that," Eleanor said. "But Mr. Reed, someone described this property to me in great detail over the course of several months. They described the house, the land, the life here. Why would someone do that?" "Can't help you with motives, ma'am. Don't pretend to understand how cruel people think." His voice was rough, gravelly, as if he didn't use it often. "But you've seen what there is to see. Not much left here but ashes and memories. Best thing for you is to head back to town, catch tomorrow's stage, and go home." "I have no home to go back to." The words came out sharper than Eleanor intended. She took a breath, trying to moderate her tone. "Mr. Reed, I didn't travel 2,000 miles to turn around and give up at the first obstacle. The letters that brought me here described a ranch with good water rights, fertile soil, and room for cattle grazing. Is that accurate?" "Was accurate, before the fire. But the land itself? The water? The soil? That's still here, isn't it?" Samuel's eyes narrowed. "What are you getting at?" Eleanor wasn't entirely sure herself. The idea was forming even as she spoke, born of desperation and stubbornness in equal measure. "Is this property for sale?" "Not for sale, tied up in probate court. Banks claiming part of it for unpaid taxes. The rest is supposed to go to William's sister in St. Louis, if they can ever locate her." "What if someone paid those taxes and made an offer on the land?" "Ma'am," Samuel's tone carried a warning that Eleanor ignored. "I have money, Mr. Reed. Enough to buy land and pay whatever taxes are owed. If someone went to the trouble of luring me here with descriptions of this property, perhaps it's because this property is worth something. I want to know what." Peterson cleared his throat. "Miss Hayes, begging your pardon, but even if the land is available, you can't just set up housekeeping out here by yourself. It's not done, and it's not safe." "Then I'll hire help. I'll hire workers to rebuild. Eleanor stopped, hearing the rising panic in her own voice. She forced herself to breathe, to think clearly despite her exhaustion. "I'm sorry, you're right. I'm not thinking clearly. It's been a very long day." Samuel Reed surprised her by nodding, some of the hardness leaving his expression. "Tom, the lady's about to fall over. She can stay in the cabin tonight if she's willing to accept rough accommodations. I'll bed down in the lean-to with the horse. Tomorrow, you can take her back to town when she's rested." It wasn't an offer Eleanor had expected. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Reed, but I couldn't impose." "You already are imposing, ma'am. Might as well make yourself useful by not fainting in my yard." He turned and walked toward the cabin, clearly expecting them to follow. The cabin's interior was spare but surprisingly clean. A single room with a rope bed in one corner, a small table and 2 chairs, a cook stove, and shelves holding supplies and tools. Everything was organized with military precision. The floor was swept, the dishes clean, the bed neatly made. "Not much, but it's dry and the roof doesn't leak," Samuel said. "There's beans and cornbread from this morning if you're hungry, Water in the bucket by the door. Tom, you staying for supper? Thank you, but no. Martha's expecting me back. I'll return tomorrow morning, Miss Hayes, to take you back to town. After Peterson departed, Eleanor found herself alone with Samuel Reed in the gathering dusk. She stood awkwardly near the door while he lit a lantern, suddenly very aware of the impropriety of her situation. Alone with a strange man in an isolated cabin, if anyone in Boston knew, her reputation would be destroyed. But her reputation was already destroyed by her flight west to marry a man who didn't exist. And somehow, standing in this rough cabin with this taciturn man, Eleanor found she didn't care as much as she once would have about Boston's opinions. "Sit down before you fall down," Samuel said, gesturing to one of the chairs. "I'll heat up the beans." Eleanor sat gratefully, suddenly aware of how hungry she was. She hadn't eaten since dawn. Samuel moved around the small space with surprising efficiency despite his single arm, stirring the pot of beans on the stove, slicing cornbread, pouring water into tin cups. He set a plate before her without ceremony. "Eat." The food was simple but good. The beans well seasoned, the cornbread surprisingly light. Eleanor ate mechanically at first, then with increasing appreciation as her appetite awakened. Samuel ate standing up, leaning against the wall near the stove, watching her with those storm-gray eyes. Finally, he spoke. "Why'd you really come west?" Eleanor looked up, startled. "I told you. You told me what happened. I'm asking why. A woman like you doesn't answer a matrimonial advertisement and travel 2,000 miles just for adventure. You were running from something." Eleanor set down her fork, meeting his gaze directly. "That's none of your concern. You made it my concern when you showed up here talking about buying this land. If you're running from the law, or from debts, or from, I'm running from a man who wanted to marry me for my money." The words came out hard and bitter. "My father died and left me an inheritance. His business partner decided I came with the package. I disagreed. So yes, Mr. Reed, I was desperate enough to answer an advertisement and agree to marry a stranger. And yes, I was foolish enough to believe the letters were genuine. But I'm not a criminal and I'm not insane, despite evidence to the contrary." Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, the corner of his mouth twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Never said you were insane. Foolish, maybe, but mostly just unlucky." He pushed away from the wall, set his empty plate on the table. "Get some sleep, Miss Hayes. Things will look different in the morning." "Where will you sleep?" "Told you. Lean to. Done it before." He moved toward the door, then paused. "There's a bar for the door. Use it. I'm not worried about myself, but a woman alone out here. Just be careful." After he left, Eleanor did bar the door. Then she sank onto the rope bed, still fully clothed, too exhausted even to properly prepare for sleep. Through the cabin's single window, she could see stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. More stars than she'd ever seen in Boston, brilliant and sharp and unfamiliar. She thought about Thomas Brennan, who'd never existed. She thought about the careful plans she'd made, all turned to ash as surely as the ranch house outside. She thought about Victor Langley, probably furious by now, and her aunt, probably scandalized. And she thought about Samuel Reed with his missing arm and his careful eyes and his unexpected kindness toward a stranger. Eleanor closed her eyes and, despite everything, fell into a deep and dreamless sleep. She woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. Dawn light filtered through the window, painting everything in shades of gold and rose. For a moment, Eleanor couldn't remember where she was. Then memory returned in a rush. The stagecoach, the sheriff's office, the burned ranch, Samuel Reed. She sat up quickly, smoothing her hopelessly wrinkled dress, pushing her hair back from her face. Through the window, she could see Samuel at the outdoor fire pit, cooking breakfast with the same efficient economy of movement he'd shown the night before. Eleanor unbarred the door and stepped outside into the cool morning air. The Montana sky stretched endless overhead, already bright with promise despite the early hour. In daylight, the devastation of the ranch was even more apparent. Acres of blackened debris, the stark chimney, the skeleton of the barn. But she could also see what the letters had described: the gentle roll of the land, the creek that wound through the property, the rich soil that even now showed green where grass had begun to reclaim the burned areas. In the distance, the mountains rose magnificent against the morning sky. "Coffee's ready," Samuel said without looking up from the pan of bacon. "Cups are on that stump." Eleanor poured herself coffee from the battered pot, grateful for its warmth despite the growing heat of the day. She stood holding the cup, unsure of the proper protocol for this situation. Emily Post had never covered morning after etiquette for spending the night in a frontier cabin with a one-armed blacksmith. Mr. Reed, I want to thank you for your hospitality. It's not hospitality. It's just not being cruel to someone who's already had a hard time of it. He divided the bacon between 2 tin plates, added cornbread left over from the previous night. Eat. Tom Peterson should be here soon to take you back. They ate in silence, Eleanor seated on a wooden bench outside the cabin, Samuel standing as seemed to be his habit. The bacon was good, salty and crisp. The morning air smelled of sage and wood smoke and something else Eleanor couldn't identify, something wild and clean and entirely unlike Boston. Finally, Samuel spoke. You meant what you said last night about having money to buy land? Eleanor considered lying, then decided against it. Yes. How much money? Enough. When he simply waited, she added $20,000. Samuel's expression didn't change, but she saw his hand tighten slightly on his coffee cup. That's a substantial sum. My father was a successful man, and I'm his only heir. $20,000 would buy a lot more than this burned-out ranch, Miss Hayes. You could purchase good land closer to town, land with buildings already standing. Why are you interested in this particular property? It was a fair question, and Eleanor wasn't entirely sure of the answer herself. Because someone thought it was worth lying about. Because it was described to me in detail for months, and I want to understand why. And because... She trailed off, searching for words. Because I don't want whoever did this to me to win. Eleanor met his eyes. I came west to start a new life, Mr. Reed. The particulars didn't work out as planned, but the goal remains the same. I need a place where I can be independent, where I can make my own decisions. This land, however damaged, represents that possibility. Samuel studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he turned and walked toward the ruins of the main house. After a hesitation, Eleanor followed. He stood amid the ashes, pointing with his single arm toward different features of the landscape. Creek runs year-round, even in dry summers. That's valuable in this territory. Soil is good. You can see where William had his garden, how things grew. Land rises gradually there to the east, gives shelter from winter winds. Those stands of timber on the north boundary provide building materials and firewood. You sound like you're trying to sell it to me. I'm telling you the truth about it. The good and the bad. He turned to face her. Bad is, this land has a mortgage on it. Bank in town holds the note for $300, and they're claiming another $200 in back taxes. William let things slide these last years. He wasn't well, wasn't thinking clearly. That's $500 you'd have to pay just to clear the title, assuming you could even purchase it from the estate. And if I had the money and could negotiate the purchase, you'd own 160 acres with no buildings, no livestock, no equipment. You'd need to build or buy everything from scratch. Even with your money, it'd be hard. For a woman alone, it'd be near impossible. But not completely impossible. Samuel shook his head slowly. Miss Hayes, I'm not trying to discourage you out of meanness. I'm trying to save you from making a terrible mistake. This life, it's hard. Harder than you can imagine coming from back east. The winters here will kill you if you're not prepared. The loneliness will break you. And even if you could build everything back up, run a ranch by yourself, this territory isn't kind to women who don't follow the rules. I'm aware that my situation is unusual. Unusual. Samuel's laugh was short and bitter. Ma'am, if you try to live out here by yourself, people will talk. They'll assume things about you, about your character. They'll make your life difficult in ways you can't anticipate. You think you're running from judgment back east? It'll be worse here. Then I'll hire someone, a housekeeper or a foreman, or with what money? After you pay for the land and materials to rebuild, how much will you have left? Eleanor opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. She didn't actually know. She'd been so focused on the immediate problem, escape from Victor Langley, a new start, that she hadn't thought through the practical realities of establishing a ranch from nothing.
The sound of an approaching wagon saved her from having to answer. Tom Peterson appeared over the rise, driving the same buggy as yesterday. Samuel walked to meet him, and Eleanor saw them exchange words she couldn't hear. Peterson glanced toward her several times, his expression troubled. Then Samuel returned while Peterson stayed with the buggy. "Tom says there's talk in town about you," Samuel said bluntly. "Sheriff did some investigating last night. Seems the letters you got were written by Charlie Preston's clerk, a young fool named Dennis Webb. Preston's the bank manager, and he's been trying to get control of this property for months. The theory is that Webb wrote those letters to lure someone out here, then Preston would swoop in with an offer to help you out of your predicament, probably by buying your return ticket in exchange for whatever money you brought west." Eleanor felt anger surge through her, hot and clarifying. "That's fraud. Hard to prove. Webb claims he was just having fun, didn't think anyone would actually come. Preston claims he knew nothing about it, and without proof otherwise," Samuel shrugged. "Then I'll provide proof. Those letters contain specific information about this property that Webb couldn't have known unless Preston told him. They describe water rights and land boundaries, and you'd have to hire a lawyer, file charges, spend money and months in court with no guarantee of winning." Samuel's tone was gentler now. "Miss Hayes, I understand you're angry. You have every right to be. But sometimes the best revenge is just moving on, building the life you want despite what people tried to do to you." "Is that what you did?" The words came out before Eleanor could stop them. "After the war, after you lost your arm, did you just move on?" Something flashed in Samuel's eyes. Pain, quickly shuddered. "That's different. Is it? Or did you come out here to escape judgment and pity, the same as I'm trying to do?" They stared at each other across the burned ground, two damaged people recognizing something in each other they hadn't intended to reveal. Finally, Samuel broke the silence. "Tom's waiting. You should go." But Eleanor's mind was racing, pieces falling into place. The clerk described this property in detail because the bank manager told him about it. Preston wants this land. That's why he hasn't foreclosed yet. He's hoping the estate will sell cheap or that he can acquire it through the back taxes. If I bought it first, you'd have a powerful enemy. I already have a powerful enemy. At least this one doesn't want to marry me. Eleanor turned to face Samuel fully. "Mr. Reed, what if I made you a proposal?" "I'm not interested in marriage either, ma'am." Despite everything, Eleanor felt her lips twitch toward a smile. "Not that kind of proposal. A business arrangement. What if I purchased this land, assuming I can, and hired you to help me rebuild? I have the capital. You have the knowledge and skills. We could be partners." "Partners?" Samuel's tone was deeply skeptical. "Why not? You're a blacksmith. You know ranching. You know this land. I have money and determination. Together, we might actually succeed at this. And what would people say about a woman and a man living on the same property, unmarried, no chaperone? Let them say what they want. We'd know the truth." Samuel shook his head. "You have no idea what you're suggesting. The damage to your reputation, my reputation is already damaged. I came west to marry a stranger, Mr. Reed. I slept alone in a cabin with you last night. My reputation isn't worth protecting anymore." Eleanor heard the bitterness in her own voice and didn't try to hide it. "What I do have is money and determination and a refusal to let people like Charlie Preston win. The question is whether you're interested in helping me prove that a burned ranch can be rebuilt into something worth having. And if I say no, then I'll find someone else. But Tom Peterson says you're honest, and Sheriff Doherty vouched for your character. That's rare enough in my experience to be worth pursuing." Samuel looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he glanced toward the ruins, the land, the mountains beyond. When he looked back at Eleanor, something had shifted in his eyes. $5 a month to rent the cabin while you're here. You'd need to stay in town most of the time, only come out during the day to oversee work. I'd need full authority to hire men and purchase materials, with you approving major expenses. Any profits from the ranch would be split evenly once expenses are covered. And Miss Hayes, the first time this arrangement causes more trouble than it's worth, I walk away. Understood?" Eleanor felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest, something that might have been hope. "Understood. Do we have an agreement, Mr. Reed?" She held out her hand.
Samuel looked at it, then at her face, then back at her hand. Slowly, he reached out and shook it with his right hand, his grip firm and calloused and honest. "We have an agreement, Miss Hayes. God help us both." Tom Peterson drove Eleanor back to Copper Falls, neither of them speaking much during the journey. Eleanor's mind was too full of plans and calculations and the enormous risk she was taking. $20,000 was a fortune. Her father's life's work, converted to bank drafts and sewn into her clothes. If she failed, if this gamble didn't pay off, she would be ruined completely. But if she succeeded, she would have precisely what she'd come west to find: independence, a new life, freedom from the past and from men who wanted to control her future. When they reached Copper Falls, Peterson directed her to a boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Clara Thornton. "Tell her I sent you. She's decent, and she won't judge." The boarding house was clean and respectable, if worn. Mrs. Thornton was a brisk woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a direct manner Eleanor immediately appreciated. $5 a week for room and board, Mrs. Thornton said, showing Eleanor to a small second-floor room with a bed, a dresser, and a window overlooking the main street. "That includes breakfast and supper. You'll need to arrange your own midday meal. No men in the rooms, no drinking, no loud noises after 9 o'clock. You have business in Copper Falls, Miss Hayes?" "I'm considering purchasing property in the area." Mrs. Thornton's eyebrows rose. "The Brennan place." News traveled fast in small towns. Eleanor decided honesty was the best approach. "Yes, ma'am, if it can be arranged." "Heard about what happened with those letters? Shameful business. Dennis Webb should be horsewhipped." Mrs. Thornton paused, seeming to wrestle with something, then added, "But I'll tell you this. Charlie Preston's been circling that property like a vulture since before the fire. If you buy it out from under him, you make an enemy. Preston's got influence in this town." "So I understand. Thank you for the warning, Mrs. Thornton. Call me Clara." The older woman studied Eleanor with something like respect. "You've got spine, I'll give you that. This town could use more women with spine. You need anything, you come find me." After Clara left, Eleanor carefully unpacked her trunk, removing her few dresses and hanging them to air. Then she took out the bank drafts sewn into her corset lining, counting them twice to be certain of the total. $20,000, represented by paper and ink and promises. Her entire future held in her hands. That afternoon, Eleanor visited the land office to inquire about the Brennan property's status. The clerk, a nervous young man who wouldn't meet her eyes, confirmed that the estate was still in probate, but that inquiries could be directed to the administrator in Helena. Then she visited Sheriff Doherty, who gave her the name of a reputable lawyer who might help her navigate the purchase. And finally, as the sun began to set, Eleanor walked past the bank, Preston's bank, and saw a well-dressed man standing in the window watching her with cold, calculating eyes. She met his gaze steadily, refusing to look away first. This was her life now. No phantom fiancé, no false promises, no easy path forward. Just a burned ranch, an agreement with a taciturn blacksmith, and her own determination to build something real from the ashes of her ruined plans. Eleanor Hayes had come west to marry a ghost. Instead, she was going to become a rancher. The next morning arrived with a clarity that made Eleanor's chest tighten with both anticipation and dread. She dressed carefully in her most practical traveling dress, pinned her hair into a severe bun that would withstand the Montana wind, and descended to Mrs. Thornton's dining room for breakfast. The other boarders, 2 miners, a schoolteacher, and a traveling salesman, glanced at her with barely concealed curiosity, but had the courtesy not to ask questions. Clara Thornton, however, had no such compunctions. She set a plate of eggs and biscuits before Eleanor with a knowing look. "Tom Peterson's waiting outside with his buggy. Says you hired him for the day." "Yes, ma'am. I need to make the trip out to the Brennan property again." "Going to look over your investment?" Clara's tone wasn't judgmental, merely interested. "Word is you and Samuel Reed came to some kind of arrangement." Eleanor shouldn't have been surprised that the news had spread. In a town this size, privacy was apparently as rare as rainfall. "Mr. Reed has agreed to help me assess whether the property is worth purchasing." "Samuel's a good man," Clara said, refilling Eleanor's coffee cup. "Keeps to himself mostly, but he's honest. Does good work when folks bring him their metalwork. There's some who won't do business with him on account of—" She gestured vaguely toward her own left arm.
On account of his missing arm? Eleanor's voice came out sharper than she intended. That seems remarkably foolish. A man's worth isn't measured by how many limbs he has. Clara's expression softened into something approaching approval. Like I said yesterday, you've got spine. Samuel could use someone in his corner. Folks around here have short memories about what those boys sacrificed in the war. After breakfast, Eleanor found Tom Peterson waiting as promised, his buggy freshly cleaned and his horses rested. The morning was cool, with high clouds promising relief from yesterday's heat. As they left town, Eleanor noticed curtains twitching in windows, faces turning to watch their departure. She lifted her chin and looked straight ahead, refusing to give the gossips the satisfaction of seeing her discomfort. "Don't mind them," Peterson said, as if reading her thoughts. "Small town, not much happens. You're the most interesting thing to come through here since the fire itself." "I'd prefer to be less interesting." "Then you shouldn't have come west to marry a ghost and decided to stay anyway." Peterson's tone was kind despite the bluntness of his words. "Miss Hayes, can I speak plain?" "I wish you would. What you're planning, buying that land, working with Samuel, it's going to be hard. Not just the work itself, though that'll be brutal, but the talk, the judgment. Folks are going to assume things about you and Samuel. They're going to say you're either foolish or immoral, possibly both. You need to be prepared for that." Eleanor watched the landscape roll past. The endless grass, the distant mountains, the vast sky that made her feel simultaneously insignificant and full of possibility. "Mr. Peterson, in Boston, I was judged for being too independent, too opinionated, too unwilling to accept the future that men had planned for me. If I'm going to be judged regardless, I'd rather it be for actually living my life on my own terms." Peterson was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Fair enough. For what it's worth, I think you and Samuel might actually make a go of this. You're both stubborn enough." They arrived at the property to find Samuel already at work in his makeshift forge. He'd set up an anvil under the lean-to, and the ring of hammer on metal echoed across the burned landscape. He wore a leather apron over a faded work shirt, his single arm moving with practiced precision as he shaped a piece of hot iron. Sweat gleamed on his forehead despite the morning cool. He looked up as the buggy approached, set down his hammer, and wiped his face with a rag. "Miss Hayes, Tom." "Good morning, Mr. Reed." Eleanor climbed down from the buggy before Peterson could assist her. "I hope I'm not interrupting your work." "Just finishing a repair for Henderson's plow. Give me a minute." Samuel plunged the hot iron into a bucket of water, sending up a hiss of steam. He examined the piece critically, then set it aside to cool. Only then did he turn his full attention to Eleanor. "You think about what we discussed yesterday?" "I've thought about little else. I went to the land office and spoke with Sheriff Doherty's recommended lawyer. Mr. Collins believes he can expedite the estate process if I'm serious about making an offer." "And are you?" "Serious?" Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "Yes. But before I commit $20,000 to this venture, I need to understand exactly what I'm buying into. You offered to show me the property honestly, both the good and the bad. I'm here to take you up on that offer." Samuel studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right then. Tom, you staying or coming back later?" "I'll stay if you don't mind. I've got some reading to catch up on." Peterson pulled a newspaper from his coat pocket and settled himself comfortably in the buggy's shade. Samuel removed his leather apron and gestured for Eleanor to follow him. "We'll start with the water source. That's the most important thing out here. Without reliable water, nothing else matters." They walked toward the creek that wound through the property, Eleanor gathering her skirts to navigate the rough ground. Samuel moved with surprising grace despite his missing arm, his stride long and confident. He clearly knew every inch of this land. "Creek's fed by springs up in the foothills," he explained as they reached the water. It ran clear over smooth stones, perhaps 15 feet wide at this point. "Never runs dry, even in August when most other creeks are just mud. William Brennan chose this land specifically for the water rights." Eleanor knelt at the bank, noting how the water ran swift and clean. "That's valuable," you said. "More valuable than gold in this territory. Ranchers fight wars over water rights. Your land, if you buy it, controls about 2 miles of this creek,
including the primary spring source. Downstream ranchers depend on your water staying clean and flowing. That sounds like it could create enemies. Could. Or it could create leverage. Samuel pointed upstream. If you dam this in the right spot, you could create a pond for irrigation, but you'd need to be careful not to cut off flow to your neighbors. There's an old territorial water compact that governs usage. You seem to know quite a bit about the legal aspects. Had to learn. When you're trying to make a living out here, ignorance can kill you. Samuel straightened, scanning the landscape with the assessing eye of a military scout. Come on, I'll show you where William had his best grazing land. They walked for nearly an hour, Samuel pointing out features Eleanor never would have noticed on her own. The slight rise that provided winter shelter, the flat areas suitable for planting, the stands of timber that could provide building materials. He spoke matter-of-factly, without embellishment, but Eleanor sensed an underlying respect for the land that bordered on affection. You love it here, she said suddenly. Samuel glanced at her, surprised. It's land. It's more than that to you. I can hear it in your voice when you describe it. He was quiet for several steps. When he finally spoke, his voice was rougher than usual. When I came back from the war, I couldn't stand cities. Too many people, too much noise, too many folks staring at this. He gestured toward his missing arm. I needed space, silence, room to breathe without feeling like I was suffocating. William Brennan gave me that. Let me stay in the cabin, work his forge, help out when he needed it. He didn't ask questions or expect war stories. He just let me be. I'm sorry for your loss then. He sounds like he was a good man. He was. Ornery as hell, stubborn as a mule, but good, fair, honest. Samuel stopped walking, turning to face Eleanor. That's why I'm helping you with this, Miss Hayes. Not because I want a partner or need the work, though God knows the money wouldn't hurt. I'm helping because William would want this land to go to someone who'd respect it, care for it, fight for it. And yesterday, watching you stand in those ashes, refusing to give up, I thought maybe you might be that person. Eleanor felt something shift in her chest, a weight she hadn't known she was carrying suddenly lightening. I won't let you down, Mr. Reed, or William Brennan's memory. Remains to be seen, but I appreciate the sentiment. Samuel resumed walking, leading her back toward the cabin. Now, let's talk about the practical realities. If you buy this land, you'll need to rebuild everything from scratch. House, barn, outbuildings, fencing. You'll need livestock, cattle or sheep, your choice, though I'd recommend starting with cattle. You'll need equipment, supplies, hired help during busy seasons. Even doing most of the work ourselves, you're looking at years before this place is profitable. Years I have. Money is more limited, but I can be strategic about spending. You'd need to live somewhere during construction. The cabin's too small for both of us, and like I said yesterday, you staying out here full-time would cause talk. I've taken a room at Mrs. Thornton's boarding house. I can stay in town and come out during the days to work. Samuel shook his head. That's 8 miles each way. You can't make that trip daily, and hiring Tom Peterson every day would eat through your money fast. Then what do you suggest? I suggest we build you a proper house first, before anything else. Not a big place, just 2 rooms, maybe 3. Something with a real door you can lock, proper windows, a good stove. Something respectable that makes it clear you're not just camping out here. Once you have that, you can stay on your own property without quite so much scandal. Eleanor considered this. How long would that take to build? With good weather and enough hands, 6 weeks, maybe 2 months. We could start with a simple frame structure, improve it later. The important thing is establishing your presence on the land, making it clear you're serious about staying. They'd reached the cabin again. Tom Peterson looked up from his newspaper, clearly curious about what they'd been discussing, but polite enough not to ask directly. Samuel gestured toward his forge. I can do most of the metal work you'll need. Nails, hinges, tools, that'll save money. And I know men who'd work for fair wages, fellows who need the work but don't much care about town gossip. But Miss Hayes, I need you to understand something before you commit to this. What's that? Once you start, there's no easy way to stop. You buy this land, you're declaring yourself. Charlie Preston will see it as a challenge. The town gossips will have a field day. And if you fail, if the money runs out or the work proves too hard, or you simply decide this isn't the life you want, you can't just pack up and go back to Boston like none of this happened. You'll have invested everything, and you'll have nothing left to fall back on. Eleanor thought about Victor Langley, probably still searching for her. She thought about her aunt's drawing room and Boston society matrons, and the life of quiet desperation she'd narrowly escaped. She thought about the letters from Thomas Brennan that had promised a life of purpose and partnership, even if the man himself had been a lie. Mr. Reed, I left Boston with no intention of ever returning. I burned my bridges as thoroughly as lightning burned this ranch. The difference is, I'm choosing to rebuild, not into what it was before, but into something new, something mine. She held out her hand again. Are you with me? Samuel looked at her hand, then at her face. Something in his expression gentled, the harsh lines around his eyes softening slightly. He shook her hand firmly. I'm with you, Miss Hayes. God help us both. You said that yesterday. It bears repeating. But there was the faintest hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth. The next week passed in a blur of activity that left Eleanor exhausted each night, but strangely exhilarated. She met with the lawyer, Mr. Collins, who began the complex process of negotiating with the estate administrator and the bank. She visited the general store and ordered supplies with a list Samuel had prepared. She wrote letters to the Helena land office and waited impatiently for responses. And every day, she made the journey out to the property with Tom Peterson, who seemed to have appointed himself her unofficial guardian and transportation service. Samuel was always there before her, already working. He'd cleared debris from around the cabin, marking out a plot for her future house. He'd repaired the small corral and managed to acquire 2 horses, a steady gelding for himself and a gentle mare he thought suitable for Eleanor to learn to ride. You can't live out here without knowing how to handle a horse, he said bluntly on the morning he presented the mare. Meet Sadie. She's old, she's patient, and she won't throw you unless you do something remarkably stupid. Eleanor had never been on a horse in her life. Boston ladies rode in carriages, not saddles. But she looked at Sadie's kind brown eyes and decided this was as good a place as any to start learning. The first lesson was humbling. Samuel boosted her into the saddle with his single arm, stronger than it looked, and Eleanor immediately felt like she was perched on top of a mountain. The ground seemed impossibly far away. Relax, Samuel said, standing at Sadie's head. The horse can feel your fear. You tense up, she tenses up. Just breathe. Easy for you to say. You're not the one about to fall to your death. It's 6 feet, Miss Hayes. You'd be bruised, not dead. But his tone was gentler than his words. Here. Reins in your left hand, like this. Not too tight. You're guiding her, not strangling her. Right hand on the saddle horn for balance. Now, just let her walk. I've got the lead. They spent an hour circling the cleared area around the cabin, Samuel leading Sadie while Eleanor concentrated on not falling off. By the end, her legs ached and her hands were cramping, but she'd managed to stay in the saddle. Not bad for a first try, Samuel said, helping her down. Eleanor's legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground. You'll be sore tomorrow. Riding uses muscles you didn't know you had. How encouraging. But Eleanor was smiling despite her discomfort. She'd ridden a horse. It was a small thing, perhaps, but it felt like a victory. Over the following days, a pattern emerged. Eleanor would arrive in the morning, and she and Samuel would work together on various tasks, clearing land, salvaging usable materials from the burned buildings, planning the construction of her house. They fell into an easy rhythm, Samuel's quiet competence complementing Eleanor's determination. He taught her practical skills with patient thoroughness, how to identify good timber, how to read the land for drainage, how to judge weather by the clouds and wind. Eleanor absorbed everything like a sponge, taking notes in a journal she'd purchased at the general store. They talked while they worked, conversations that ranged from the practical to the surprisingly personal. Samuel told her about growing up in Missouri, about enlisting when the war broke out, about the Battle of Shiloh where he'd lost his arm. Cannonball hit the supply wagon next to me, he said one afternoon while they were sorting through salvaged nails. Shrapnel took my arm off just below the elbow. Field surgeon said I was lucky, 6 inches higher and I'd have bled out before they could stop it. Didn't feel lucky at the time. I can imagine. Or actually, I can't. I've never experienced anything like that. Hope you never do. War isn't noble or glorious, no matter what the politicians say. It's just blood and mud and boys dying for causes they barely understand. Samuel set aside a bent nail, his hand moving automatically to the next one. When I came home, folks didn't know what to do with me. They'd thank me for my service in this bright, false way, then avoid looking at my arm like it was shameful, like I was broken merchandise they didn't want to acknowledge. That must have been terribly lonely. It was. That's why I came west as soon as I could. Out here, people care more about what you can do than what you're missing. William never once treated me like I was damaged. He'd just hand me a tool and expect me to use it. Turned out you can do most things with one arm if you're stubborn enough. Eleanor thought about her own experiences, the ways she'd been dismissed and underestimated. People see what they expect to see. They look at you and see a disabled veteran instead of a skilled blacksmith. They look at me and see a foolish woman instead of someone capable of running a ranch. You think you're capable of running a ranch? Samuel's tone was curious, not challenging. I don't know yet, but I'm capable of learning, and I'm capable of not giving up, which might be more important. Might be at that. Samuel glanced at her, and Eleanor caught a glimmer of respect in his gray eyes. You're tougher than you look, Miss Hayes. Eleanor, if we're going to be business partners, you should probably use my given name. Samuel hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the informality. Wouldn't be proper. Propriety is somewhat beside the point at this stage, don't you think? I'm staying overnight in a cabin you built, working alongside you without a chaperone, planning to live on property you're managing. If we're going to worry about proper form, we've already failed spectacularly. A smile tugged at Samuel's mouth, an actual smile, not just the ghost of one. It transformed his face, softening the harsh lines and making him look years younger. Fair point. Eleanor, then, and you should call me Samuel. Mr. Reed makes me sound like my father, and that's not a comparison I enjoy. Samuel it is. That evening, as Tom Peterson drove her back to town, Eleanor realized she was happier than she'd been in months, maybe years. The work was hard and her body ached and her future was uncertain. But for the first time since her father's death, she felt like she was moving toward something instead of running away. Mrs. Thornton noticed the change. You're looking more settled, she commented over breakfast the next morning. Less like a frightened rabbit, more like a woman with a purpose. I suppose I am. Mr. Collins thinks we'll have a resolution on the property purchase within 2 weeks. If all goes well, I'll own the Brennan Ranch by month's end. And Samuel Reed will be your foreman, my partner. We'll split profits once the ranch is established. Clara raised her eyebrows. Generous terms. Fair terms. Without his knowledge and labor, I'd have no hope of making this work. He deserves to benefit from the success. You're an unusual woman, Eleanor Hayes. So I've been told, usually not as a compliment. Take it as one from me. Clara refilled Eleanor's coffee cup. This town needs more women who aren't afraid to be unusual. Gets boring otherwise. But not everyone in Copper Falls shared Clara's approval. Eleanor became increasingly aware of hostile glances and whispered conversations that stopped when she entered the general store. The school teacher who boarded at Mrs. Thornton's began taking her meals in her room. Even Tom Peterson mentioned that some folks were expressing concern about the situation at the Brennan property. The situation came to a head 1 week after Eleanor's arrival in Copper Falls. She was at the general store purchasing fabric to make proper work clothes when a woman's voice cut through the quiet shop. I think it's disgraceful, personally. A woman living out there with a man, unmarried, no chaperone. What kind of example does that set? Eleanor turned to see a well-dressed woman in her 40s standing with 2 companions, all 3 staring at her with undisguised disapproval. The speaker wore an elaborate hat decorated with feathers and a dress far too fine for a frontier town. Her face was sharp with self-righteousness. Mrs. Preston, isn't it? Eleanor said coolly. I believe your husband manages the bank. The woman's chin lifted. I'm Miranda Ellis, Charles Preston's business partner. And yes, before you ask, I know exactly who you are and what you're doing. Excellent. Then you know I'm purchasing property and establishing a ranch. Perfectly legal and respectable activities. Respectable? Miranda's laugh was cold. Living in sin with that crippled blacksmith is hardly respectable. You should be ashamed of yourself. The shopkeeper, Mr. Henderson, cleared his throat nervously. Ladies, perhaps— I'm not living with anyone, Eleanor said, keeping her voice level despite the anger rising in her chest. I'm renting a room at Mrs. Thornton's boarding house, as anyone in town can verify. Samuel Reed and I are business partners, nothing more. And I'll thank you not to speak of him in such disrespectful terms. Mr. Reed is a war veteran who sacrificed for this country. He's a one-armed drifter who can barely support himself, Miranda shot back. And you're a foolish Eastern woman who doesn't understand Western ways. This territory has standards, Miss Hayes. We don't tolerate women who flaunt convention. What you don't tolerate is women who refuse to be controlled. Eleanor set down the fabric she'd been examining, turning to face Miranda fully. Your partner tried to defraud me with fake letters. When that failed, you're attempting to drive me out through gossip and social pressure. But I'm not leaving, Mrs. Ellis. I'm buying the Brennan Ranch. I'm rebuilding it, and neither you nor Mr. Preston can stop me. Miranda's face flushed with anger. Charles had nothing to do with those letters. Dennis Webb acted alone. How convenient that Webb worked for your partner. How convenient that the letters describe property your partner wanted to acquire. How very, very convenient. You can't prove anything. Perhaps not, but I can ensure that everyone in this town knows about the scheme. I can make certain that anyone considering doing business with Preston's bank understands exactly what kind of ethics guide his operations. Eleanor smiled without warmth. I may be a foolish Eastern woman, Mrs. Ellis, but I'm a foolish Eastern woman with money and determination. That makes me considerably more dangerous than you anticipated. She gathered her purchases and walked out of the store with her head high, aware of every eye in the place watching her departure. Her hands were shaking with adrenaline, but she didn't let it show until she'd rounded the corner out of sight. Tom Peterson was waiting with his buggy, as scheduled. He took one look at her face and asked, "What happened?" "I just made enemies of the bank manager and his partner." Eleanor climbed into the buggy, her movements sharp with residual anger. "Tom, do you know anything about Miranda Ellis?" "Some. She came to Copper Falls about 2 years ago, bought into Preston's bank with money from her late husband's estate. There's talk that she and Preston are more than business partners, if you take my meaning, though both are careful about appearances. She's smart and ruthless, handles most of the bank's investment decisions while Preston manages the daily operations. So if Preston wanted to acquire property through underhanded means, she'd likely know about it. More than know about it, she'd probably plan it." Peterson guided the horses out of town. "Eleanor, you need to be careful. Preston's got influence, but Miranda's got something more dangerous. She's got connections. Her late husband was a territorial judge. She knows people in Helena, people with power. If you make her angry enough, she can make your life very difficult. She already has. She called Samuel a crippled blacksmith and suggested I was living in sin with him." Peterson's expression darkened. "That's beneath contempt. Samuel's worth 10 of Miranda Ellis." "I told her as much. Perhaps not in those exact words, but the sentiment was clear." Eleanor took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. "I'm tired of people like her, Tom. People who think they can control others through shame and social pressure. I dealt with enough of that in Boston. I won't tolerate it here." Brave words. "But Eleanor, you need to understand, in a town this size, social pressure isn't just uncomfortable. It can be crippling. If the right people decide to ostracize you, you won't be able to buy supplies, hire workers, conduct business. They can strangle your ranch before it even gets started. Then I'll find a way around them. Buy supplies from Helena if necessary. Hire workers from other towns. I didn't come this far to be defeated by gossip." Peterson was quiet for a moment. "You remind me of my daughter. She's got that same stubborn streak. It's gotten her in trouble more than once, but it's also gotten her through some hard times. I respect that." They arrived at the property to find Samuel in the midst of measuring and marking ground for Eleanor's house. He looked up as they approached, immediately noticing Eleanor's agitation. "What happened?" Eleanor dismounted from the buggy. She'd been practicing and could now manage it without assistance, and walked over to where Samuel stood with his measuring tape. "I had an encounter with Miranda Ellis in town. She said some unkind things about both of us." Samuel's expression closed off. "Let me guess. Called you a whore and me a cripple?" in slightly more polite terms, but essentially yes. And you're surprised? No. Angry. Eleanor picked up one end of the measuring tape, helping Samuel mark the dimensions. She accused us of living in sin, suggested that a one-armed man couldn't possibly be useful, and implied that I was either foolish or immoral for working with you. She's not wrong about the gossip. I warned you. I don't care about the gossip, Samuel. What I care about is that people like Miranda Ellis think they can dictate how we live our lives. I've had enough of that to last a lifetime. Samuel studied her face, seeing something there that made him nod slowly. All right then. If you're prepared to weather the storm, I'll stand with you. But Eleanor, it's going to get worse before it gets better. Preston and Ellis won't take this lying down. Let them do their worst. We have work to do. They spent the afternoon finalizing the house plans. Samuel had designed something simple but sturdy. 2 rooms initially, with the possibility of adding more later. The main room would serve as both living area and kitchen, with a good stove and proper windows. The second room would be Eleanor's bedroom, private and secure. They'd build it with lumber from the property's own timber, which would save considerable money. We can start construction next week if the weather holds, Samuel said, reviewing his sketches. I've got 3 men lined up to help. Good workers who won't cause trouble. With 5 of us working, we can have the frame up in a week, walls and roof in another 2 weeks. Then it's just finishing work. 5 of us? You, me, and 3 hired men. You said you wanted to be involved in every aspect. I did. I do. Eleanor looked at the sketches, trying to imagine the house standing where now there was only empty ground. Samuel, can I ask you something personal? He tensed slightly, but nodded. Ask. Why are you really helping me? And please don't say it's just about honoring William Brennan's memory or needing the money. There's something more, I think. Samuel was quiet for so long that Eleanor thought he might not answer. Finally, he set down the sketches and looked out across the land, his expression distant. When I came back from the war, I couldn't work. Not at first. The army gave me a small pension, but it wasn't enough to live on, and I couldn't do the kind of labor I'd done before. I tried going home to Missouri, but my family, they didn't know what to do with me. My father kept suggesting I become a clerk, something suitable for a man with one arm. Like the only thing I'd lost was a limb, not my whole sense of who I was. He paused, his jaw working. I drifted west because I didn't know what else to do. Ended up in Denver, broke and desperate. A blacksmith there named Jacob Morrison took pity on me. He was missing 3 fingers on his right hand from a forge accident. He said, "Boy, you got one good arm and determination. That's all you need. I'll teach you the trade." That was kind of him. It was more than kind. It saved my life. Morrison taught me that being wounded doesn't mean being useless. He taught me how to adapt, how to work with what I had, instead of mourning what I'd lost. When I'd learned enough to work on my own, he gave me tools and sent me on my way with his blessing. Samuel turned to look at Eleanor directly. You remind me of how I felt back then, lost and angry and determined not to be broken. Morrison gave me a chance when no one else would. I figure I owe it to his memory to do the same for you. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes, but refused to let them fall. Thank you for telling me that. And Samuel, you're not just giving me a chance, you're giving me hope. That matters more than you know. Something shifted in the air between them, a connection forming that was deeper than their business arrangement. Samuel cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the emotional weight of the moment. We should get back to planning. There's still the matter of the barn and outbuildings to consider. They worked until sunset, making lists and calculations and plans. Tom Peterson dozed in his buggy, occasionally waking to add a comment or observation. As the light began to fade, painting the mountains in shades of purple and gold, still the matter of the barn and outbuildings to consider. They worked until sunset, making lists and calculations and plans. Tom Peterson dozed in his buggy, occasionally waking to add a comment or observation. As the light began to fade, painting the mountains in shades of purple and gold, Eleanor stood looking at the land that might soon be hers and felt something settle in her chest. This was right. This was where she was supposed to be. The legal process moved forward with surprising speed. Mr. Collins proved to be an excellent lawyer, navigating the complex web of estate law and territorial regulations with skill. Within 2 weeks, he'd negotiated a purchase price of $700 for the property, $500 to clear the bank's claims and back taxes, $200 to the estate for the land itself. It's a fair price, Collins told Eleanor in his small office above the livery stable. Perhaps even generous, given the condition of the property. But the estate administrator is eager to settle, and the bank is satisfied with recovering their money. If you're ready to proceed, I can have the papers drawn up within days. I'm ready. Eleanor withdrew a bank draft from her reticule, already prepared. This covers the purchase price plus your fees. Collins examined the draft, his expression carefully neutral. Miss Hayes, this represents a significant investment. Are you certain you understand the risks involved? Mr. Collins, I appreciate your concern, but I'm not acting impulsively. I've spent 2 weeks examining every aspect of this purchase. The land is good, the water rights are valuable, and I have a solid plan for development. Yes, there are risks, but there are also opportunities. Very well, Collins accepted the draft. I'll file the paperwork with the territorial office in Helena. You should have clear title within the month. Congratulations, Miss Hayes. You're about to become a property owner in Montana Territory. Eleanor felt a surge of exhilaration mixed with terror. $700, a substantial portion of her inheritance, committed to a burned ranch and an uncertain future. But it was done. She was committed now. She shared the news with Samuel that afternoon. He accepted it with his characteristic calm, simply nodding and saying, "Good. Then we can start construction tomorrow. The men I hired are ready to begin." The next morning, Eleanor arrived at dawn to find 3 men already waiting with Samuel. He introduced them briefly. Jack Cooper, a weathered rancher in his 50s who needed work during the off-season. Miguel Santos, a skilled carpenter who'd immigrated from Mexico and had family in the area. And Henry Yates, a young man barely 20 who was strong as an ox and willing to work for fair wages. All 3 tipped their hats respectfully to Eleanor, and none of them asked inappropriate questions about her arrangement with Samuel. They simply picked up tools and got to work. The construction became a consuming focus. Eleanor worked alongside the men, doing whatever tasks she could manage, hauling timber, holding boards in place while they were nailed, mixing mortar for the stone foundation. The work was brutally hard, leaving her hands blistered and her back aching, but she refused to slack off or accept special treatment. Samuel watched her with something that might have been approval. He drove the work forward with quiet efficiency, his single arm no impediment to his authority or skill. The men respected him, following his directions without question. By the end of the first week, the foundation was complete and the frame was beginning to rise. Eleanor stood one evening watching the skeleton of her house take shape against the sunset and felt pride swell in her chest. "It's really happening," she said to Samuel, who'd come to stand beside her. "Did you doubt it would?" "Maybe a little. It seemed almost impossible when we started. Most worthwhile things do." Samuel wiped sweat from his forehead with his bandana. "You did good work this week, Eleanor. The men are impressed. They didn't expect an Eastern lady to be willing to get her hands dirty." "What did you expect?" Samuel's mouth quirked in that almost smile. "I expected exactly what I got. Someone too stubborn to know when to quit. Is that a compliment?" "Take it as one." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the light fade. Eleanor was aware of Samuel's presence beside her, solid, dependable, real. She'd started this partnership out of desperation and necessity, but somewhere along the way it had become something more. Not romance, neither of them was looking for that, but genuine friendship and respect. "Samuel, can I ask you something?" "Seems to be your habit," Eleanor smiled. "Do you ever regret coming west? Do you miss Missouri or your family?" "No." The answer came quickly, without hesitation. "My family wanted me to be someone I wasn't anymore. They wanted the boy who went to war, not the man who came back. Out here, I can just be. No expectations, no pity, no one telling me what I should be able to do or not do. I understand that more than you might think. I know you do. That's why this works." Samuel turned to face her, his expression serious. "Eleanor, things are going to get harder from here. Once your house is finished and you start living on the property full-time, the gossip will intensify. Preston and Ellis will likely make moves against us. You need to be prepared for that." "I am prepared, or as prepared as I can be." Eleanor met his gaze steadily. But Samuel, I want you to know, whatever happens, I'm grateful. For your help, your honesty, your partnership. Even if this all falls apart tomorrow, these weeks have been worth it. It's not going to fall apart. We won't let it. Samuel's voice carried quiet conviction. We're building something here, Eleanor. Something that will last. I believe that.
So do I.
As darkness fell completely, they walked back to the cabin together. Tom Peterson had departed earlier, and Eleanor had arranged to stay overnight in town. But standing here with Samuel, looking at the framework of her new house rising from the ashes of the old ranch, Eleanor felt like she was finally, truly home. The foundation had been laid. The frame was rising, and whatever storms came next, they would weather them together. The house took shape like a promise being kept, board by board, nail by nail. 3 weeks after they'd broken ground, the walls stood firm and the roof kept out the increasingly frequent autumn rains. Eleanor spent her days working alongside Samuel and the hired men, learning skills she'd never imagined needing in her Boston life. How to read a level, how to judge the straightness of a board, how to swing a hammer without hitting her own thumb more than occasionally. Her hands, once soft and pale, were now calloused and sun-darkened. Her dresses, even the practical ones she'd made from sturdy fabric, were permanently stained with sawdust and dirt. Mrs. Thornton had stopped commenting on the state of Eleanor's appearance when she returned to the boarding house each evening, simply drawing her a hot bath and serving supper without judgment. "You're looking more like a rancher every day," Clara observed one evening as Eleanor soaked her aching muscles in the copper tub. "Less Boston, more Montana." I'm not sure if that's meant as a compliment or an observation. Both. You've got color in your cheeks now, and your hands don't shake when you pick up your coffee cup. You're settling into yourself. Clara poured more hot water into the tub. That's worth noting. Most folks who come west spend years trying to figure out who they're supposed to be out here. You seem to have sorted it faster than most. Eleanor considered this. It was true that she felt more solid somehow, more certain of her place in the world than she had in years. The work was hard and her future uncertain, but every board she helped nail in place, every stone she helped set in mortar, was proof of her own capability. "I think it's because I'm building something that's mine," Eleanor said slowly. "In Boston, everything was my father's or would have been Victor Langley's. Nothing belonged to me. But that house, crude as it is, that's mine. I'm creating it with my own hands, and with Samuel Reed's help." "Yes, with Samuel's help." Eleanor smiled, thinking of how they'd worked together that day, how Samuel had patiently shown her the proper technique for setting a window frame, his quiet competence making even difficult tasks seem manageable. He's a good teacher, patient but demanding. He doesn't accept sloppy work from anyone, including me. He's also a good man. Lonely, I think, but good. Clara handed Eleanor a towel as she stepped from the bath. "People in town are still talking, you know, about you and him. Let them talk." Some of the talk is getting uglier. Miranda Ellis has been making rounds, suggesting that you and Samuel are engaged in all manner of impropriety. She's got some of the church ladies convinced you're a fallen woman. Eleanor wrapped the towel around herself, feeling anger kindle in her chest. And what does Sheriff Dougherty say to these accusations? Tom says the sheriff isn't interested in gossip. He's more concerned with actual crimes, which you and Samuel aren't committing. But Eleanor, you need to understand, in a town this size, reputation matters. If enough people believe Miranda's lies, it won't matter if they're true or not. Then those people are fools. Eleanor began dressing in her nightgown, movements sharp with frustration. Samuel and I are business partners. We work during daylight hours in full view of whoever wants to watch. I sleep here, in your respectable boarding house. He sleeps in his cabin, alone. There's nothing improper about our arrangement. I know that, you know that, Samuel knows that. But Miranda Ellis is very good at making people see what she wants them to see. Claire's expression was troubled. "Just be careful, dear. Preston's bank holds mortgages on half the properties in this county. If he decides to make things difficult for people who do business with you, he has the power to do it." Eleanor lay awake long after Clara had retired, staring at the ceiling of her small room and trying not to let fear overwhelm her determination. She'd known there would be opposition. She'd prepared herself for gossip and social ostracism, but the idea that Preston and Ellis could use financial leverage to isolate her, to prevent her from hiring workers or buying supplies, was more frightening than she'd anticipated. She thought about Samuel, who'd already weathered so much judgment and hardship. He didn't deserve to have his reputation further damaged because of their partnership. Perhaps she should reconsider, find a different arrangement, protect him from... No. Eleanor sat up in bed, angry at herself for even thinking it. Samuel was a grown man capable of making his own decisions. He'd entered this partnership with full knowledge of the potential consequences. Treating him like he needed protection from her choices would be as insulting as the people who treated him like he was helpless because of his missing arm. They would move forward as planned, and if Preston and Ellis wanted a fight, Eleanor would give them one. The next morning dawned clear and cold, with frost sparkling on the grass and breath misting in the air. Eleanor arrived at the property to find Samuel already at work on the interior walls of her house, Miguel Santos helping him install the boards that would divide the main room from the bedroom. "Morning," Samuel said without looking up from his work. "We should have the interior walls finished by tonight if the weather holds. Then it's just the stove installation and finishing work." "That's excellent progress." Eleanor tied on her work apron, a practical garment she'd sewn herself from canvas, and picked up her hammer. "Where do you need me?" "Help Miguel with the measuring. My hand's full here." They worked in companionable silence for the first hour. The only sounds the rap of hammers and the rasp of saws cutting through wood. Henry Yates arrived mid-morning with a wagon full of supplies from town, including the cast-iron stove Eleanor had ordered from Helena. "Mr. Henderson at the general store said to tell you he's received your special order," Henry reported, unloading heavy bags of nails. "Also said Mrs. Ellis came in right after me and asked a lot of questions about what I was buying and who it was for." Samuel's jaw tightened. "She's keeping track of our supplies." "Seems like." Henderson told her it wasn't her business, but she's persistent. Eleanor helped Henry unload the wagon, her mind working through the implications. If Miranda was tracking their purchases, she was probably calculating costs, trying to determine how much money Eleanor had and how long it might last. The knowledge felt invasive, like having someone rifle through her personal belongings. "Let her watch," Eleanor said firmly. "We're not doing anything we need to hide." But as the day progressed, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling of being observed, judged, calculated against. She found herself making mistakes, measuring wrong, hammering nails crooked, her concentration broken by persistent worry. Samuel noticed. He always noticed. During the midday break, when the men had dispersed to eat their lunches, he approached Eleanor where she sat on a stack of lumber, picking at the food Mrs. Thornton had packed. "You're distracted today. What's wrong?" Eleanor considered deflecting, then decided against it. Samuel deserved honesty. "Miranda Ellis is tracking our supply purchases, trying to figure out how much money I have, how long I can sustain this." "I know. Tom mentioned it yesterday." "Doesn't it bother you, being watched like we're criminals?" Samuel sat down beside her, his long legs stretched out before him. "I spent 2 years in army camps being watched every minute of every day. Had officers judging whether I was fit for duty, doctors judging whether I'd survive, other soldiers judging whether I was still a man worth knowing after I lost my arm. You get used to being watched eventually. I don't want to get used to it. I want people to leave us alone." "Then you chose the wrong life." Samuel's tone wasn't unkind, just matter of fact. "Out here, everyone watches everyone. Small communities survive by knowing each other's business. The difference is whether they watch with good intentions or bad ones. And Miranda Ellis clearly has bad intentions." "She does. But Eleanor, here's what you need to understand. People like Miranda thrive on reactions. They want you scared, want you making mistakes, want you to prove their assumptions right. The best revenge is just doing the work and doing it well. Let your success speak louder than her gossip." Eleanor looked at Samuel's profile, taking in the strong line of his jaw, the gray eyes that had seen more hardship than she could imagine, the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from him despite everything he'd endured. "How did you get so wise?" "Wouldn't call it wisdom, just surviving long enough to learn some hard lessons." He stood, offering his hand to help her up. "Come on."
We've got walls to finish." By evening, the interior walls were complete. The house had taken shape into something real and substantial. 2 rooms divided by a solid wall, with a door between them that Miguel had crafted with surprising artistry. The main room had windows on 2 sides, letting in light and air. The bedroom was smaller but private, with a window overlooking the creek. Eleanor stood in the doorway of her bedroom, imagining it furnished with a real bed, a dresser, perhaps a small chair for reading. It wasn't large, but it was hers.
Every inch of it built with her own labor and determination. "What do you think?" Samuel asked from behind her. "I think it's perfect. I think it's the most beautiful house I've ever seen." Samuel laughed, the sound rare and genuine. "Then you need to see more houses. This is rough carpenter work, Eleanor. Nothing fancy about it." "It doesn't need to be fancy. It just needs to be mine." Eleanor turned to face him, suddenly overwhelmed with gratitude. "Samuel, I don't know how to thank you properly. You've given me... You paid for my labor. Thanks aren't necessary." "They are, though, because this is about more than labor." Eleanor struggled to find the right words. "You've given me hope. You've treated me like I'm capable of this, even when I wasn't sure myself. That matters more than the hammer and nails." Samuel looked uncomfortable with the praise, shifting his weight and glancing away. "You were already capable. I just didn't get in your way." Before Eleanor could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. 2 riders appeared over the rise, well-dressed men on expensive horses, clearly not working ranchers. Eleanor recognized one of them immediately from his appearance at the bank window, Charles Preston, the bank manager. Samuel tensed beside her. "That's trouble coming." Preston and his companion, a thin man with calculating eyes and a lawyer's demeanor, dismounted near the house. Preston removed his hat with exaggerated courtesy, his smile not reaching his cold eyes. "Miss Hayes, Mr. Reed, good evening. I hope we're not interrupting." "You are," Samuel said bluntly. "What do you want, Preston?" "Now, Samuel, let's be civil. I've simply come to introduce Miss Hayes to my associate, Mr. Horace Blackwell. He's an attorney from Helena who specializes in property law. I thought he might be helpful to Miss Hayes, given her recent purchase." The man named Blackwell stepped forward, extending his card, saying, "Miss Hayes, a pleasure. I understand you've recently acquired the Brennan property. Congratulations on your purchase." Eleanor accepted the card, but didn't bother reading it. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwell. However, I already have legal representation through Mr. Collins. I don't require additional counsel." "Collins is competent for simple transactions," Blackwell said smoothly, "but I understand you're planning significant development on the property. There are territorial regulations regarding water rights, land use, and construction that can be quite complex. I'd be happy to review your plans, ensure you're in full compliance. For a fee, no doubt." "Naturally, but given the potential complications..." "What complications?" Eleanor kept her voice level, though she could feel her heart hammering. "My purchase was legal and properly filed. The property is mine," Preston interjected, his tone dripping with false concern. "Miss Hayes, please understand we're trying to help. This territory has rules about development, especially regarding water usage. The downstream ranchers have rights to that creek water. If you were to do anything that interfered with their access, build a dam, for instance, or divert the flow, you could face significant legal action." Samuel took a step forward, placing himself slightly between Eleanor and the 2 men. "We're not building any dams, and we know the water compact terms. You're fishing for problems that don't exist. I'm simply ensuring Miss Hayes understands her obligations." Preston's smile widened, showing teeth. "Of course, if she finds the legal complexities overwhelming, I'd be happy to take the property off her hands. I'm prepared to offer a fair price, say $800. That's more than you paid, Miss Hayes. You'd make a tidy profit for just a few weeks' work." The insult was clear. Preston was offering her barely more than her purchase price, knowing full well that she'd already spent hundreds on materials and labor. He expected her to be intimidated by his legal threats and grateful for his generous offer. Eleanor felt anger surge through her, hot and clarifying. "Mr. Preston, thank you for your concern, but the property is not for sale. Not at $800, not at any price. I intend to develop this land according to all applicable regulations. and I have full confidence in my legal counsel. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have work to finish before dark." Preston's expression hardened. "Miss Hayes, I don't think you understand the situation. Without cooperation from the business community in Copper Falls, you'll find it very difficult to succeed out here. Suppliers might become reluctant to extend credit. Workers might decide they have other commitments. The bank holds mortgages on most of the surrounding properties. If those neighbors were to receive certain suggestions about protecting their water rights." "Are you threatening me, Mr. Preston?" Eleanor's voice was ice. "Merely explaining the realities of frontier business." "Then let me explain my reality. I have no need for credit because I have cash. I pay my workers fair wages in advance, so their loyalty is to me, not to your threats. And if you attempt to manipulate my neighbors into filing frivolous legal actions, I'll ensure that every newspaper from here to Helena knows exactly how you and your clerk Dennis Webb perpetrated fraud by luring an innocent woman west with false promises." Preston's face flushed with anger. "You have no proof. I have the letters. I have Sheriff Doherty's statement regarding the handwriting. I have witnesses to Webb's confession. Perhaps individually these items aren't enough for a criminal conviction, but they're certainly enough to destroy your reputation." Eleanor smiled coldly. "And unlike you, Mr. Preston, I don't need to maintain a reputation for trustworthiness to survive. I'm already the scandalous Eastern woman living in sin with a crippled blacksmith, remember? I have nothing left to lose by exposing your schemes." The silence that followed was electric with tension. Blackwell looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Preston's hands clenched and unclenched at his sides, his carefully maintained veneer of civility cracking. Samuel hadn't moved, but Eleanor could feel the coiled readiness in his posture, the way he'd positioned himself to act if Preston made any threatening move. Finally, Preston jammed his hat back on his head. "You're making a mistake, Miss Hayes, a very serious mistake. I've made mistakes before. I survived them. I'll survive you." Eleanor crossed her arms, standing her ground. "Good evening, gentlemen. Please don't visit my property again without invitation." Preston and Blackwell mounted their horses and rode away, their backs stiff with affront. Eleanor waited until they'd disappeared over the rise before allowing herself to sag against the doorframe of her new house, her legs suddenly weak with the aftermath of adrenaline. "That was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've ever witnessed," Samuel said quietly. "Possibly both. He threatened me. He threatened our workers, our neighbors, our entire enterprise. Was I supposed to just accept that? No, but Eleanor, you just made a powerful enemy even angrier. Preston's not going to let this go." "Good, because neither am I." Eleanor straightened, forcing strength back into her spine. "Samuel, I'm tired of being afraid. I'm tired of letting people like Preston and Miranda Ellis dictate my choices through intimidation. If they want to fight, they'll get one." Samuel studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right then. But if we're going to fight, we need to be smart about it. Preston mentioned downstream neighbors and water rights. That's his angle. He'll try to turn your neighbors against you by making them afraid you'll cut off their water." "But we're not going to do that." "No. But we need to make sure they know that, and we need to do it before Preston poisons them against you." Samuel thought for a moment, his brow furrowed. "There are 3 ranches downstream from here, the Hendersons, the Coopers, and the Martinez family. Jack Cooper is already working for us, but the others might be vulnerable to Preston's manipulation. Then we need to talk to them, explain our plans, assure them their water rights will be respected. We need to do more than talk. We need to put it in writing, a formal agreement guaranteeing their access to the creek water, signed and witnessed. Something legally binding that Preston can't undermine." Eleanor felt hope kindle in her chest. "Can we do that? Is it legal?" "I think so. We'd need Collins to draft it properly, but yes, I think we could create a water-sharing agreement that protects everyone's interests." Samuel's expression shifted into something that might have been admiration. "You're thinking strategically now. Good. I learned from watching you. You're always 3 steps ahead, anticipating problems before they arise. Military training? You learn to think defensively or you die." Samuel glanced at the darkening sky. "It's getting late. You should head back to town before it's full dark. But Eleanor was still thinking through the implications of Preston's visit, the threats he'd made, and the opportunities they might present. Samuel, what if we did more than just protect ourselves? What if we went on offense? What do you mean? Preston's entire strategy depends on secrecy and plausible deniability. He threatens people privately, manipulates situations behind the scenes, always maintaining his respectable facade. What if we exposed him publicly, made his tactics visible to everyone? You already threatened to do that with the fraud letters. But I didn't actually do it. I should have gone to the newspaper immediately, made sure everyone knew what he'd done. Eleanor paced back and forth in front of her new house, her mind racing. And the water rights issue? If we create those formal agreements with the neighbors, we should publicize them. Make sure everyone knows we're protecting downstream access, that we're being responsible stewards of the land. It makes Preston's fear-mongering look like what it is, malicious lies. Samuel watched her pace, his expression thoughtful. You're learning to think like a rancher. Out here, reputation and relationships matter as much as land and water, maybe more. Then let's build both. A reputation for fairness and relationships with our neighbors. Eleanor stopped pacing, facing Samuel directly. Can we do this? Can we actually win against Preston and Ellis? I don't know. They have money, influence, connections. We have determination and the moral high ground. It's not an even fight. Nothing about my life has been an even fight since my father died. I'm getting used to being the underdog. Samuel's mouth quirked in that almost smile she was learning to treasure. Then let's go see Collins tomorrow morning, draft those water agreements, and figure out our next move. But Eleanor, what? Be prepared for this to get uglier before it gets better. Preston struck at you directly today because you challenged him in front of a witness. He's a proud man, and proud men do stupid things when they feel threatened. I can handle ugly. I believe you can, but I want you to be careful anyway. There was something in Samuel's tone that made Eleanor look at him more closely. Concern, certainly, but something else beneath it. Something that might have been fear, not for himself but for her. I'll be careful, she promised. And Samuel, thank you for standing with me today, for always standing with me. Partners, he said simply. That's what we agreed to. Partners? Eleanor echoed. But as she rode back to town with Tom Peterson, who'd been waiting patiently in his buggy out of earshot during the confrontation, she found herself thinking that partnership didn't quite capture what she and Samuel were building together. It was deeper than business, more personal than mere collaboration. It was trust. It was respect. It was the knowledge that someone saw you clearly, flaws and strengths both, and chose to stand beside you anyway. Eleanor had never had that before. Not really. Her father had loved her, but wanted to control her. Victor Langley had wanted to own her. Even the women she'd called friends in Boston had judged her by impossible standards of propriety and behavior. But Samuel saw her covered in sawdust and sweat, watched her make mistakes and learn from them, knew her fears and her stubbornness, and still treated her as an equal. That was worth more than all the burned ranches in Montana Territory. The next morning, Eleanor met with Mr. Collins in his office. She explained Preston's threats and Samuel's suggestion about formal water agreements. Collins listened intently, making notes on a legal pad. It's a smart strategy, he said when she'd finished. Water rights disputes are common out here, and they can drag on for years in court. A proactive agreement with your downstream neighbors would demonstrate good faith and undercut any attempt by Preston to stir up trouble. Can you draft such agreements? I can, but Miss Hayes, you need to understand, these agreements will need to be specific and binding. You'll be committing yourself to maintaining certain water flows, restricting certain activities on your property. It will limit your future options. That's fine. I have no intention of damming the creek or diverting water. I just want to use what I need for my ranch and let the rest flow naturally. Then I'll draft 3 identical agreements, one for each downstream property owner. You'll need to visit them personally, explain your intentions, and get their signatures. The agreement should be witnessed by someone neutral. Sheriff Doherty would be ideal. Eleanor left Collins's office with a renewed sense of purpose. Samuel had been right. Thinking strategically, building relationships, protecting their interests proactively rather than just reacting to threats. This was how they would succeed. She found Samuel at the property, working on installing her stove. The heavy cast iron unit required careful positioning and a properly constructed chimney. Miguel Santos was helping him, the two men working with the kind of synchronized efficiency that came from mutual respect and experience. Collins is drafting the water agreements, Eleanor reported. He thinks it's a sound strategy. We should be able to visit the neighbors by the end of the week. Good. I've been thinking about the barn. We're going to need one eventually, and the sooner we build it, the sooner we can acquire livestock. How much will that cost? Samuel wiped his hands on a rag, his expression serious. Depends on how large we build it and what materials we use. A basic structure suitable for a dozen cattle and a few horses, maybe $300 in materials and labor. More if we want something substantial that'll last decades. Eleanor did quick mental calculations. After the land purchase, construction of the house, and paying workers, she had roughly $18,000 remaining. $300 for a barn was manageable, but she needed to be careful not to deplete her resources too quickly. Let's plan for spring, she decided. Get through the winter first, see how the house holds up, make sure we have enough reserve for supplies and unexpected expenses. Then we can build the barn and start acquiring livestock. Cautious, I approve. Samuel gestured toward the stove. This is almost set. You'll be able to cook your own meals soon instead of depending on Mrs. Thornton's kitchen. I'll have to learn to cook first. That wasn't part of a Boston lady's education. I can teach you the basics. Nothing fancy, but you won't starve. They spent the afternoon finishing the stove installation and discussing plans for the property. Eleanor found herself sketching ideas in her notebook. Where to plant a garden in the spring, where to position the barn for maximum efficiency, how to organize the property for both practical function and future growth. She was so absorbed in planning that she didn't notice the visitor approaching until Samuel touched her arm, his expression alert and wary. A woman was riding toward them, alone, on a fine chestnut mare. As she drew closer, Eleanor recognized her with a sinking feeling. Miranda Ellis, dressed in a riding habit that probably cost more than most ranchers earned in a year. Miss Hayes, Mr. Reed? Miranda dismounted with practiced grace, not waiting for assistance. I hope I'm not interrupting. You are, Samuel said bluntly. What do you want? I came to speak with Miss Hayes privately, woman to woman. Miranda's smile was cold. Surely you can spare her for a few minutes, Mr. Reed. Eleanor wanted to refuse, to send Miranda away without conversation, but curiosity won out. What could Miranda possibly want to say that required privacy? It's all right, Samuel. I'll speak with her. Eleanor walked a short distance from the house, Miranda following. When they were out of Samuel's earshot, Eleanor turned to face the other woman. Say what you came to say. Miranda studied her for a long moment, her expression unreadable. You're more formidable than I expected. Most women in your position would have crumbled by now. I'm not most women. Clearly, Charles underestimated you. I didn't. Miranda glanced back at Samuel, who was watching them with undisguised suspicion. That man would die for you, do you know that? I've seen the way he looks at you when you're not watching. It's not just partnership or friendship. It's devotion. Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? I've made it my business to understand people, Miss Hayes, how they think, what they want, what they'll sacrifice for it. Samuel Reed is a man who's lost almost everything, his arm, his place in society, his sense of purpose. You gave him something back, a reason to care, to build, to hope. That makes you dangerous. Dangerous to whom? To my plans, to Charles's interests, to the carefully balanced power structure of this entire region. Miranda stepped closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Here's what you need to understand. Charles wants your land because of the water rights. But I want something different. I want the entire northeastern section of this territory to develop in a specific way, with specific people controlling specific resources. Your little ranch disrupts that vision. Then your vision will have to adjust. Or I'll have to remove the disruption. Miranda's smile was razor sharp. I'm giving you one last chance, Miss Hayes. Sell me the property. I'll pay you $1,200, enough to set you up comfortably somewhere else. Take your blacksmith with you if you're so attached to him. Start over in a place where you're not making enemies you can't afford to have. And if I refuse, then I'll destroy you. Not through gossip or social pressure, those are Charles's crude tools. I'll use something far more effective. I'll make it impossible for you to succeed. Every supplier will refuse your business. Every worker will find other employment. Every neighbor will see you as a threat to their own survival. You'll spend every dollar you have fighting battles on 10 different fronts, and in the end, you'll fail anyway. Eleanor met Miranda's eyes, seeing the cold calculation there, the absolute certainty of a woman who'd never lost a battle she'd chosen to fight. And in that moment, Eleanor made a decision that would define everything that followed. No. Miranda blinked, clearly not expecting such a simple refusal. No? No, I won't sell. No, I won't be intimidated. And no, I don't believe you're as powerful as you think you are. Eleanor kept her voice steady, channeling every ounce of determination she possessed. You see, Mrs. Ellis, you're making the same mistake everyone makes about me. You see a woman alone, out of her element, vulnerable. What you don't see is that I've already survived the worst thing I could imagine. I came 2,000 miles to marry a man who didn't exist, lost everything I thought I was building, and found myself alone in a strange place with enemies on every side. And I didn't just survive it, I'm thriving. You call this thriving? I call it living on my own terms, which is more than you're doing, hiding behind Charles Preston and pulling strings from the shadows. Eleanor took a step forward, and Miranda actually stepped back. You want to fight me? Then fight me. But understand this. I have nothing left to lose. My reputation is already ruined. My connections are already severed. My old life is already destroyed. That makes me far more dangerous than you anticipated, because I'm not afraid of losing things I've already lost. Miranda's expression hardened. You'll regret this. Perhaps. But at least I'll regret my own choices, not someone else's. Miranda turned and mounted her horse in a single fluid motion. She looked down at Eleanor from the saddle, her face cold with fury. Charles was right. You are a fool. An idealistic, naive fool who thinks determination is enough. This territory eats people like you, Miss Hayes. I'll enjoy watching it happen. She rode away without waiting for a response, her horse's hooves thundering against the hard ground. Samuel was at Eleanor's side immediately. What did she say? She offered me $1,200 for the property. When I refused, she threatened to systematically destroy everything we're building. And you told her no anyway. I told her no anyway. Eleanor watched Miranda disappear over the rise, her hands shaking with residual adrenaline. Samuel, I think I just made everything much worse. Maybe. Or maybe you just drew a line that needed drawing. Samuel's hand briefly touched her shoulder, a gesture of support that steadied her more than words could. Either way, we're in this together now. Whatever comes, we face it together. Eleanor nodded, unable to speak past the sudden tightness in her throat. Together. It was such a simple word, but it carried the weight of a promise that went far deeper than their business partnership. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson. Eleanor's house stood completed against the darkening landscape, solid and real in hers. In the distance, the mountains rose like ancient sentinels, unmoved by human drama and ambition. This was her land now, her life, her choice. And whatever Miranda Ellis or Charles Preston or anyone else threw at her, Eleanor would face it standing on ground she'd earned with her own sweat and determination. That was worth any fight. The water agreements were ready 3 days later. Eleanor held the neatly written documents in her hands, reading through Collins's precise legal language that promised to protect her neighbor's access to the creek while preserving her own rights to reasonable use. It was exactly what they needed, a shield against Preston's manipulation and proof of her good intentions. We'll start with the Hendersons, Samuel said as they prepared for the visits. They're closest and most practical-minded. If we can get Jim Henderson to sign, the others will likely follow. The Henderson Ranch lay 2 miles downstream from Eleanor's property, a well-maintained spread with a sturdy house and outbuildings that spoke of years of hard work. Jim Henderson was a weather-beaten man in his 60s who greeted them with cautious courtesy, his wife Martha standing in the doorway watching with sharp eyes. Miss Hayes, Samuel, what brings you out here? Henderson's tone was neutral, giving nothing away. Eleanor had rehearsed this conversation in her mind, but standing in Henderson's yard with his suspicious gaze on her, the words felt inadequate. Still, she pressed forward. "Mr. Henderson, I wanted to speak with you about the creek water. I know there's been talk, concerns that I might interfere with the downstream flow. I wanted to assure you personally that I have no such intentions, and to offer you a formal legal guarantee." She held out the document. Henderson took it slowly, his eyes scanning the dense text. His wife came closer, reading over his shoulder. "This says you'll maintain minimum flow rates," Henderson said after a long moment, "and you can't build dams or diversions without downstream consent." "That's correct. I have no interest in controlling the water, Mr. Henderson. I just need enough for my own use, drinking water, a small garden, whatever livestock I eventually acquire. The rest will flow to you exactly as it always has." "Preston said you'd try to cut us off. Said Eastern folks don't understand water law, don't respect territorial customs." Samuel spoke up, his voice carrying quiet authority. "Preston's lying, Jim. You know me. I wouldn't be part of anything that hurt honest ranchers. This agreement protects everyone. Eleanor gets to develop her land, and you get legal assurance that your water rights are secure." Henderson studied Samuel for a long moment, then looked back at Eleanor. "Why should I trust you? You're new here, don't know our ways." "Because I'm putting my promise in writing, witnessed and legally binding," Eleanor said. "If I violate these terms, you can take me to court and you'll win. Preston's making verbal insinuations with no accountability. I'm offering you documented protection." Martha Henderson stepped forward, surprising everyone. "Jim, the girl's making sense. Preston's been circling our property too, making noises about buying us out. I don't trust him. At least Miss Hayes is being honest about her intentions." Henderson's weathered face creased in thought. Finally, he nodded. "All right, I'll sign. But Miss Hayes, understand something. If you do cut off our water, legal document or not, things will get ugly fast. Water wars out here don't stay civilized." "I understand, Mr. Henderson, and I give you my word, your water rights will be respected." Henderson signed the document with Sheriff Doherty serving as witness. As they prepared to leave, Martha pulled Eleanor aside. "You've got spine, girl, but you should know Miranda Ellis came by here yesterday. Said some unpleasant things about you and Samuel, suggested you might be an immoral influence in the community." Martha's voice dropped to a whisper. "I told her to mind her own business, but not everyone will. You watch yourself." "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. I appreciate the warning." The visits to the Cooper and Martinez ranches went similarly. Jack Cooper, already working on Eleanor's house construction, signed immediately with a grin. "Been waiting for you to do this. Shows you're thinking like a real rancher, not some Eastern dreamer." The Martinez family was more reserved. Carlos Martinez was a proud man who'd worked his land for 20 years, raising 5 children on sparse resources and stubborn determination. He listened to Eleanor's explanation with his arms crossed, his face impassive. "My father came here from Mexico with nothing," he said finally, his English heavily accented but clear. "He built this ranch with his hands, respected the land and the water. When he died, he told me, 'Protect the water, Carlos. Without water, nothing lives.'" "I understand that, Mr. Martinez. That's why I'm here." "Preston, he tells me you will steal our water, that Eastern people think they own everything, think they are better than us who work the land." Carlos's dark eyes were penetrating. "But I see you. Your hands, they are not soft anymore. Your face, it has sun on it. You work like we work." "I'm trying to learn your ways, Mr. Martinez, to respect this land and its people." Carlos looked at Samuel. "You trust her?" "With my life," Samuel said simply. Something in Carlos's stern expression softened. He took the document, read it carefully with the assistance of his eldest son, who translated the more complex legal terms, then signed with a firm hand. "You keep your promise, Miss Hayes. We will be good neighbors. You break your promise." He left the threat unspoken, but clear. "I won't break it." As they rode back toward Eleanor's property, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. 3 signed agreements meant 3 neighbors who wouldn't be turned against her by Preston's lies. It was a small victory, but it mattered. "You did well today," Samuel said. "Spoke to them with respect, didn't condescend or make promises you can't keep. They appreciated that.
I meant every word. Those families have been here for decades. They've earned their place. I'm just trying to earn mine. You're doing more than trying. You're succeeding.
Samuel glanced at her, and Eleanor caught a warmth in his expression that made her heart skip.
Eleanor, I want to tell you something.
What? He seemed to struggle with the words, his jaw working. When you first showed up here with Tom Peterson, I thought you were going to be a problem. Another person who'd cause trouble and then leave, sticking me with the mess. But you've proven me wrong about everything. You're tougher than I expected, smarter, more determined. You don't quit, even when quitting would be easier. Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. Samuel, let me finish. What I'm trying to say is, I'm glad you stayed. I'm glad you didn't let Preston or Miranda or anyone else drive you away. This partnership, it's been good for me, given me purpose again. So thank you.
The words hung between them, weighted with meaning that went beyond their simple content.
Eleanor wanted to say that the partnership had been equally important to her, that Samuel had given her strength when she'd been at her lowest, that his quiet support had meant more than he could know. But before she could form the words, the sound of a rider approaching at speed drew their attention. Sheriff Dougherty appeared over the rise, his horse lathered with sweat. His expression was grim. Samuel, Eleanor, we've got trouble. Big trouble. Eleanor's stomach dropped. What kind of trouble? The kind that comes from back east. Dougherty dismounted, pulling a telegram from his pocket. This came through an hour ago. It's addressed to Eleanor Hayes, care of Copper Falls. The telegraph operator brought it to me because, well, you need to read it. Eleanor took the telegram with trembling hands. The words swam before her eyes, but their meaning was brutally clear.
Miss Hayes,
stop, your presence required. Helena, immediately stop legal matter regarding your father's estate. Stop. Victor Langley arriving October 15th with claims against inheritance. Stop. Advise immediate consultation with attorney. Stop. James Whitmore, Esq. Helena. Victor's coming here. Eleanor's voice sounded distant to her own ears. He found me. Samuel took the telegram, reading quickly. Who's Victor Langley? My father's business partner, the man I was running from when I came west. Eleanor sat down hard on a nearby log, her legs suddenly unable to support her. He wanted to marry me to gain control of my inheritance. I thought I'd escaped him. This telegram says he has claims against your father's estate. What kind of claims? Dougherty's voice was gentle but professional. I don't know. My father's will was straightforward. Everything came to me. But Victor was involved in all of father's business dealings. He could claim debts or disputed contracts or... Eleanor's mind raced through possibilities, each more frightening than the last. He could challenge the will itself, claim father wasn't of sound mind when he wrote it, or that I unduly influenced him. Can he do that? Samuel's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. With enough lawyers and enough money, he can try. And Victor has both. Eleanor looked up at the two men, seeing her own fear reflected in their faces. If he succeeds, if he can prove any claim against the estate, my inheritance could be tied up in probate for years. I might lose access to the money I've already spent. I could lose everything. Including this property, Samuel said grimly, if you can't prove you had legal right to the funds you used to purchase it. The full horror of the situation crashed over Eleanor like a wave. She'd spent nearly $2,000 on the land and construction. If Victor successfully challenged her inheritance, she might be forced to repay that money she no longer had. The ranch could be seized, sold to satisfy the debt. Everything she'd built, all the progress she'd made, could vanish like smoke. What do I do? The question came out as a whisper. Dougherty crouched in front of her, his weathered face kind. You go to Helena. You meet with this attorney Whitmore and find out exactly what Langley's claiming. You fight it with every legal tool available, and you don't let that bastard intimidate you into giving up what's rightfully yours. But the ranch? I can't leave now. There's too much work to do, and if Preston finds out I'm vulnerable, I'll handle the ranch, Samuel said firmly, and I'll handle Preston. You need to go to Helena and deal with this legal situation before it gets worse. Eleanor looked at Samuel, seeing the determination in his gray eyes, the set of his jaw that said he'd made a decision and wouldn't be swayed from it. I can't ask you to, You're not asking. I'm telling you, this is what partners do. We cover for each other when trouble comes. Samuel held out his hand to help her up. How soon can you be ready to leave? Tomorrow morning, I suppose. I'll need to pack, arrange transportation. I'll take you. Tom Peterson's voice came from behind them. They turned to see the liveryman approaching, leading his horses. Heard the commotion, figured something was wrong. Helena's 4 days' journey by wagon, 3 if we push hard. I can have you there by October 14th, day before Langley arrives. Tom, I can't afford... Didn't ask about payment. You need to get to Helena. I'll get you there. We can settle accounts later. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes at the kindness of these men who barely knew her but were willing to help without question. Thank you. All of you. That night, Eleanor packed her few belongings at Mrs. Thornton's boarding house, her hands moving mechanically while her mind spun through scenarios and possibilities. Clara helped in silence, understanding that sometimes the best support was simple presence. You'll come back, Clara said finally, folding Eleanor's spare dress with care. You're a fighter. Whatever this Langley man tries, you'll find a way to beat him. What if I can't? What if he really does have legitimate claims against the estate? Then you'll deal with it. But Eleanor, I've watched you these past weeks. You've faced down gossip, threats, and every kind of obstacle. You've built a house with your own hands and stood up to powerful enemies. You're not the same woman who stepped off that stagecoach looking lost and frightened. Don't forget that. Eleanor hugged the older woman impulsively. Thank you, Clara, for everything. The room, the kindness, the friendship. Just come back safe. And bring that Langley fellow down a peg or two if you can. Men like that need taking down. Samuel was waiting when Tom Peterson's wagon arrived at dawn. He handed Eleanor a carefully wrapped package. What's this? Food for the journey. Some bread, cheese, dried meat, and this. He pulled out a small revolver, the metal gleaming dully in the early morning light. I know you probably don't know how to use it, but having it visible might discourage trouble. Samuel, I can't. Take it. Montana Territory isn't Boston. There are stretches of road where help is hours away. Just having a weapon can prevent problems. He showed her the basic operation, how to load it, how to aim, how to fire if absolutely necessary. I don't expect you'll need it, but I'll sleep better knowing you have it. Eleanor tucked the revolver into her bag, oddly comforted by its weight. What will you do while I'm gone? Keep working. Finish the interior details on your house. Start planning for the barn. Make sure Preston doesn't try anything while you're away. Samuel's expression was serious. Eleanor, about what I said yesterday. I know. And Samuel, this partnership, it's been important to me too. More important than I know how to express. Something passed between them. A moment of understanding that didn't require words. Then Tom Peterson cleared his throat. We should get moving if we want to make good time. The journey to Helena was long and grueling. They traveled through autumn landscape painted in golds and russets, the mountains standing stark against crystalline blue skies. Tom Peterson was a steady companion, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of the territory's history to distract Eleanor from her anxiety. But as they drew closer to Helena, Eleanor's dread grew. She'd left Boston to escape Victor Langley, and now she was riding straight into a confrontation she'd hoped to avoid forever. Helena was larger than Copper Falls, a territorial capital with real buildings, paved streets in the downtown area, and the bustle of genuine commerce. Tom Peterson directed them to a modest hotel near the Capitol building, helping Eleanor secure a room before going to stable his horses. Eleanor barely noticed her surroundings. She asked the hotel clerk for directions to James Whitmore's law office and walked there immediately, not allowing herself time to lose courage. Whitmore's office occupied the second floor of a brick building on Main Street. The attorney himself was a distinguished man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and shrewd eyes that assessed Eleanor thoroughly when she introduced herself. Miss Hayes, thank you for coming so promptly. Please sit down. We have much to discuss. Eleanor sat, her back rigid with tension. Your telegram mentioned claims against my father's estate. What exactly is Mr. Langley alleging? Whitmore pulled out a thick folder, his expression grave. Several things. First, he's claiming that your father owed him money, specifically $50,000 from a business venture that supposedly failed due to your father's mismanagement. Second, he's suggesting that your father's will should be challenged on grounds of mental incompetence, claiming that your father was not of sound mind in his final months. And third, this is perhaps most concerning, he's claiming that you stole money from your father's estate before the will was properly executed. Eleanor's blood ran cold. That's a lie. All of it. My father paid Mr. Langley for his services throughout their partnership. There were no outstanding debts, and I didn't steal anything. The inheritance was legally mine. I believe you, Miss Hayes, but belief and legal proof are different things. Langley has brought documentation, contracts, letters, financial records. Some of it looks quite convincing. Can I see it? Whitmore hesitated, then pushed the folder across his desk. I should warn you, some of these documents contain your father's signature. If they're forgeries, they're excellent ones. Eleanor opened the folder with shaking hands. The top document was a contract dated 2 years before her father's death, bearing her father's signature and detailing a $50,000 investment in a mining venture. The venture had apparently failed, leaving Victor Langley as the primary creditor. She'd never seen this contract before. Her father had shared most of his business dealings with her, especially in his final years when he'd been grooming her to understand the family's finances. He'd never mentioned any mining venture. This is forged, she said flatly. My father would never have invested in mining. He considered it too speculative. Can you prove that? Eleanor stopped, realizing she couldn't. Her father's business philosophies had been verbal, shared over dinner conversations and afternoon walks. She had no written evidence of his investment principles. I know my father, Mr. Whitmore. This isn't something he would have done. Knowing and proving are different standards in court, Miss Hayes. We'll need more than your intuition to fight these claims. Eleanor forced herself to look through the rest of the documents. There were letters supposedly from her father to Langley discussing the mining investment and acknowledging the debt. There were financial records showing money transferred from her father's accounts. There was even a codicil to the will, a document she'd never seen, that supposedly reduced her inheritance by the amount owed to Langley. It was comprehensive, detailed, and utterly false. But Eleanor could see how convincing it would look to a judge who didn't know her father, who couldn't recognize the subtle ways these documents didn't match her father's actual business practices. When does Mr. Langley arrive? Tomorrow. He's requested a meeting with both of us here in my office to discuss settlement terms. Settlement? Eleanor's voice sharpened. I'm not settling fraudulent claims. Miss Hayes, I understand your anger, but you need to consider the practical realities. Fighting this in court could take years and cost thousands of dollars. Even if you ultimately win, the legal fees could consume most of your inheritance. Langley knows this. He's counting on you being unable to afford a prolonged legal battle. So he thinks he can force me into giving him money by threatening to tie up everything in court. Essentially, yes. It's a common tactic, unfortunately. Eleanor stood abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked Helena's busy street. Below, people went about their daily lives, unaware that her entire future was crumbling. She thought of her ranch, her house, Samuel working alone to maintain everything. She thought of the money she'd already spent, the commitments she'd made. She thought of Victor Langley's cold eyes and predatory smile, his absolute certainty that she would eventually surrender to his demands. No, she said quietly. Miss Hayes, no, I won't settle. I won't give him 1 penny of my father's money. Eleanor turned to face Whitmore, her resolve hardening. These documents are forgeries, and I'll prove it. I don't know how yet, but I will. My father was an honest man who kept meticulous records. Somewhere in his files, there's evidence that will contradict Langley's claims. Those files are presumably in Boston, in Langley's possession now. Then I'll find another way. Mr. Whitmore, I need you to tell me honestly, do you believe Langley's claims are legitimate? Whitmore was quiet for a long moment, studying Eleanor's face. Finally, he shook his head. No. Professionally, I have to advise you based on the evidence presented. But personally, no, I don't believe him. The documents are too perfect, too comprehensive. Real business records have inconsistencies, gaps, informal notes. These look like they were created specifically for litigation. Then help me fight him. I'll pay whatever it costs. Miss Hayes, this could consume your entire inheritance. Then I'll be poor. But I won't let Victor Langley steal what my father worked his entire life to build. Eleanor sat back down, leaning forward intensely. My father loved me, Mr. Whitmore. He wanted me to be independent, to have choices, to never be at the mercy of men like Langley. Fighting this isn't just about money, it's about honoring his memory and his wishes. Whitmore nodded slowly, a slight smile touching his lips. Very well. Then let me tell you what we're up against and how we might prevail. They worked through the afternoon and into the evening, Whitmore explaining territorial law, inheritance procedures, and the specific weaknesses in Langley's case. Eleanor listened intently, taking notes, asking questions, her mind cataloging every detail that might prove useful. The key will be the meeting tomorrow, Whitmore said as they concluded. Langley will expect you to be frightened, willing to negotiate. If you show weakness, he'll exploit it. You need to be strong, confident, and absolutely unwilling to compromise. I can do that. I've had practice recently. I don't doubt it. Miss Hayes, may I ask, what made you come to Montana Territory? The telegram I sent was addressed generally to Copper Falls. I had no idea if it would even reach you. Eleanor told him the story, the matrimonial advertisement, the false letters, her arrival to find a burned ranch and a phantom fiancé. Whitmore listened with increasing amazement. And yet you stayed? Purchased the property and began rebuilding? I had nowhere else to go. And honestly, Mr. Whitmore, that burned ranch felt more like home than Boston ever did. Out there, I can be myself without apology. That's worth fighting for. I see that. And Miss Hayes, you should know that if you win this case, when you return to Montana, you'll be returning with a proven legal right to your inheritance. No one will be able to question your funds or your property ownership. This battle, as difficult as it is, will actually strengthen your position. It was a perspective Eleanor hadn't considered. She'd been so focused on the threat that she hadn't seen the potential opportunity. If she could defeat Langley's claims conclusively, it would eliminate any lingering questions about her finances or her right to the ranch. That night, Eleanor barely slept. She lay in her hotel room rehearsing arguments, preparing herself mentally for the confrontation to come. She thought of Samuel's steady presence, his quiet confidence in her abilities. She thought of Clara Thornton and Tom Peterson and all the people in Copper Falls who'd shown her unexpected kindness. She thought of her father, who taught her to stand up for herself, to think strategically, to never back down from bullies. Tomorrow, she would face Victor Langley, and she would win. The morning dawned clear and cold. Eleanor dressed in her most proper Boston attire, a severe black dress that made her look older and more formidable, her hair pinned in a style that said she was not to be trifled with. She examined herself in the mirror, seeing not the frightened woman who'd fled Boston, but someone harder, stronger, tempered by months of frontier life. You can do this, she told her reflection. You've faced worse than Victor Langley. Tom Peterson was waiting in the hotel lobby. Thought you might want some company walking to the lawyer's office. You don't have to. Didn't say I had to. Said I wanted to. Tom offered his arm. Besides, figure you could use a friendly face before dealing with this Langley fellow. They walked through Helena's morning streets, Eleanor drawing strength from Tom's solid presence. When they reached Whitmore's building, Tom squeezed her hand. You're tougher than any Eastern dandy, Eleanor. Don't forget that. Whitmore was already in his office, along with two other men. One was a lawyer, clearly, expensive suit, calculating eyes, leather briefcase full of documents. The other was Victor Langley. He'd aged in the months since Eleanor had last seen him, new lines around his cold eyes, gray threading through his hair, but the predatory smile was exactly as she remembered, and the way he looked at her made her skin crawl. Eleanor, how good to see you again. Victor's voice was smooth, practiced. You're looking well, considering your circumstances. Montana clearly agrees with you. Mr. Langley. Eleanor kept her voice cool, professional. She did not offer her hand, did not smile. Shall we begin? Whitmore gestured to chairs arranged around his conference table. Everyone sat, and Eleanor was gratified to notice that she appeared calmer than Victor's lawyer. a nervous man named Philip Crawford, who kept shuffling his papers. "Miss Hayes," Crawford began, "my client has presented substantial evidence of debts owed by your late father. We're prepared to resolve this matter quickly and amicably if you're willing to negotiate in good faith." "I'm prepared to hear Mr. Langley's claims," Eleanor said, "though I dispute their validity entirely." Victor leaned forward, his expression earnest, the same false sincerity he'd used when courting her in Boston. "Eleanor, please understand, I'm not trying to hurt you. Your father was my friend and partner for 15 years, but business is business. He made investments that failed. He owed me money. Surely you can understand that I have a right to collect those debts. What I understand is that you've manufactured false documents to support fraudulent claims." Eleanor met his gaze directly. "My father kept meticulous records, Mr. Langley. I worked with him on his accounts for years. He never mentioned any mining venture, never discussed owing you money, never wrote any codicil, reducing my inheritance. Your father was unwell in his final months. Perhaps he didn't want to burden you with business concerns. My father had a heart attack. His mind was perfectly sound until the moment he died." Eleanor pulled out her own small notebook, opening to pages where she'd recorded details from her father's files. "In March of 1882, my father wrote a detailed letter to his attorney, specifically stating that all his business arrangements with you were fully settled and paid. He mentioned no outstanding debts." Victor's smile tightened slightly. "I'm afraid your memory is unreliable, Eleanor. Grief can distort. It's not memory. It's documented. Mr. Whitmore has filed a request with the Boston Probate Court to examine all of my father's correspondence from the past 5 years, including letters to and from you, Mr. Langley. If your claims are legitimate, those letters will support them. If they're false, the letters will prove it." She was bluffing. Whitmore had only discussed filing such a request, not actually done it yet. But Victor didn't know that. She saw something flicker in his eyes, a moment of uncertainty quickly masked. Crawford cleared his throat. "Miss Hayes, even if we set aside the debt claims, there remains the question of the funds you removed from your father's estate before probate was complete. That constitutes theft. It constitutes accessing my own inheritance through legal bank drafts issued by my father's attorney after the will was read and approved. Everything I did was documented and legal. If you're suggesting otherwise, I invite you to present evidence." The meeting continued for 2 hours, Victor and Crawford pressing their claims while Eleanor systematically dismantled each argument. Whitmore said little, letting Eleanor handle the confrontation herself, but his presence was supporting, and his occasional legal clarifications were devastating to Crawford's positions. Finally, Victor's composure cracked. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping back. "This is absurd. Eleanor, stop this foolishness. You can't win. I have resources you can't match, connections you can't compete with. I will tie your inheritance up in courts for years. You'll spend every penny fighting me, and you'll still lose." Eleanor stood as well, meeting him eye to eye. "Then I'll lose. But Mr. Langley, I want you to understand something. I'm not the frightened girl you tried to manipulate in Boston. I came west with nothing but determination, and I built a life from ashes and burned timber. I've faced down threats from people far more frightening than you. So yes, you might have resources. But I have something more valuable. I have the truth, and I have nothing left to lose by fighting for it." Victor's face flushed with anger. "You'll regret this. When you're broke and desperate, when that pathetic ranch of yours fails and you have nowhere left to turn, you'll come crawling back, and I won't be nearly so generous with my terms. I won't be coming back. Montana is my home now." Eleanor picked up her reticule, preparing to leave. "Mr. Crawford, Mr. Langley, if you wish to pursue these claims in court, my attorney will respond to all properly filed documents. But I will not negotiate, I will not settle, and I will not be intimidated. Good day." She walked out of the office with her head high, not looking back, not allowing Victor to see how her hands trembled with residual adrenaline. Tom Peterson was waiting outside, taking one look at her face and offering his arm without comment. They walked 2 blocks before Eleanor's legs gave out. She sat down hard on a bench outside a dry goods store, pressing her hands to her face. "I did it," she whispered. "I actually stood up to him. You did more than that. You demolished him." Tom sat beside her, his voice warm with approval. I could hear some of it through the door, that part about building a life from ashes. That was perfect. I meant every word. Eleanor lowered her hands, looking at Tom with wondering eyes. I wasn't even frightened. Not really. I kept thinking about Samuel and the ranch and everything we've built, and Victor just seemed small, insignificant. Because he is. He's just a bully with money. You're someone who actually builds things, creates things. That's real power. Eleanor laughed, the sound shaky but genuine. I think I just declared war on a man with far more resources than I have. You declared that you won't be pushed around. That's different. Tom stood, offering his hand. Come on, let's get some decent food and then we'll start the journey home. You've got a ranch to run. Home. The word settled warm and sure in Eleanor's chest. Not Boston, with its suffocating propriety and painful memories. Not even Helena, with its relative civilization and comfort. Home was a rough house on burned land, a creek running clear over stones, mountains rising in the distance, and a one-armed blacksmith who believed in her even when she didn't believe in herself. Home was where Samuel was waiting. They left Helena the next morning, beginning the long journey back to Copper Falls. Eleanor felt lighter somehow, as if confronting Victor had burned away the last remnants of fear that had been weighing her down. Whatever came next, legal battles, financial struggles, continued opposition from Preston and Ellis, she would face it, standing firm. You're smiling, Tom observed on the second day of travel. First time since we left Copper Falls. I'm thinking about getting home, about seeing the ranch again, about telling Samuel how the meeting went. About Samuel specifically, or the ranch in general? Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. Both. The ranch and Samuel, they're connected somehow. I can't imagine one without the other. Tom was quiet for a moment, then said carefully, Eleanor, can I speak frankly? Please. Samuel's a good man, but he's been hurt. Not just his arm, his spirit. The war did things to him that don't show on the outside. He came to Montana looking for peace, and I think he'd mostly given up on anything more than that. Then you arrived, and I've watched him change. He's got purpose again, something to care about beyond just surviving. I feel the same way. He gave me hope when I had none. What I'm saying is, be careful with each other. You're both vulnerable in ways you might not realize. And people in town are already talking. If your relationship becomes more than partnership, the talk will get worse. I know, but Tom, I've spent my whole life worrying about what people would say, what they would think. It nearly destroyed me. I won't live that way anymore. Good. Just wanted to make sure you knew what you might be walking into. They reached Copper Falls late on the fourth day, tired and dusty, but home. Eleanor insisted Tom drop her at the ranch rather than the boarding house. She needed to see Samuel, needed to share the news of her confrontation with Victor. The property looked beautiful in the fading light, her little house standing solid and complete, smoke rising from Samuel's cabin chimney. As the wagon approached, Samuel emerged, and Eleanor's heart lifted at the sight of him. He helped her down from the wagon, his hand lingering on hers a moment longer than necessary. How did it go? I'll tell you everything, but Samuel, first, thank you for holding everything together while I was gone, for believing I could handle this. Never doubted you for a moment. Samuel's eyes searched her face, seeing past her brave words to the exhaustion and strain beneath. Come inside. You need rest.